Most ancient cities disappeared slowly, conquered, abandoned, or swallowed by time. But some didn't have that luxury. Some were erased in seconds. One moment they stood full of life, and the next, they were gone. Flash-burned, shattered, buried. These aren't myths. Archaeologists have found the ruins, streets turned to glass, bodies frozen mid-step, walls collapsed like paper. It wasn't always war. Sometimes it was fire, sometimes water, sometimes the sky itself. What's strange is how little we still understand. Why were so many cities destroyed in similar ways? Why do these disasters leave behind the same signs, even thousands of miles apart? And how did the people living there experience that final moment? An interesting mystery that might answer this question is that of the day Tall El-Hammam burned. Mohenjo-Daro, the skeletons in the street. In the vast sun-baked plains of Sindh, Pakistan, lie the enigmatic ruins of Mohenjo-Daro, a city that once thrived millennia ago, a jewel of the Indus Valley civilization. Its very name, Mound of the Dead Men, whispers of the ancient lives that once bustled within its meticulously planned streets and imposing structures. Yet, among the dust and the meticulously unearthed artifacts, a particularly unsettling discovery has fueled intense debate and spawned theories that stretch the boundaries of conventional archaeology. The skeletons found in the streets, seemingly caught in sudden violent death, leading to the bizarre and controversial strange radiation theories. The story of these skeletons, and the city itself, begins long before the modern era. The first formal archaeological recognition of Mohenjo-Daro came in 1922 when Sir John Marshall's expedition began systematic excavations. What they uncovered was astonishing: a sophisticated urban centre, laid out on a grid plan, boasting advanced drainage systems, public baths, and multi-storied houses built of baked bricks. This was a civilization of immense organisational skill and technological prowess, far exceeding what had been previously imagined for such an ancient period in this region. As excavations continued, the team began to unearth human remains. While some burials were found suggesting funerary practices, it was the discovery of skeletons in unusual contexts that truly perplexed the archaeologists. These were not neatly interred bodies. Instead, they were found scattered, sometimes in groups, in the streets and collapsed buildings, lying in postures that suggested an abrupt and violent end. For instance, on the western side of the city near the DKG area, a group of 14 skeletons was found, including men, women and children. Some were lying face down, others contorted, as if struck down mid-stride. A particularly poignant discovery was a family of 5, a man, a woman and 3 children, huddled together in a room, seemingly trying to protect themselves. These finds, dating back to around 1900 BCE, immediately raised questions about the city's demise. The initial interpretation, based on these scattered remains, was that Mohenjo-Daro had suffered a sudden, catastrophic end, perhaps a massacre. The bodies, unburied and left where they fell, seemed to tell a tale of invasion and violence, of inhabitants overwhelmed by an unseen enemy. This idea gained traction, especially in the context of early 20th century archaeology, where the collapse of ancient civilizations was often attributed to external forces. However, a closer look at the evidence began to cast doubt on this simple explanation. While the skeletons were undeniably present, their numbers were remarkably few for a city that, at its peak, likely housed tens of thousands of people. If an invading army had swept through, a far greater number of bodies, along with signs of extensive warfare weapons, fortifications breached, and widespread burning would be expected. Such evidence was largely absent. There were no widespread signs of destruction by fire, no massive piles of rubble from prolonged sieges, and no large collections of weaponry embedded in the skeletons. The city seemed to have been abandoned, not violently destroyed in the traditional sense. This lack of conventional destruction, coupled with the unusual state of the scattered skeletons, sparked alternative, more speculative theories. Among the most sensational and enduring are the strange radiation theories, often linking the demise of Mohenjo-Daro to some form of ancient atomic or nuclear event. These theories, while lacking mainstream scientific acceptance, found fertile ground among those seeking explanations beyond conventional archaeological narratives. One of the key proponents of these radical ideas was David W. Davenport, who in his 1979 book, atomic destruction in 2000 BC argued that Mohenjo-Daro was destroyed by an ancient nuclear explosion. He pointed to several pieces of evidence to support his claims. Firstly, he focused on the skeletons themselves, suggesting that the postures and the apparent lack of extensive trauma from conventional weapons indicated a different kind of destructive force. He proposed that the scattering of bodies as if flung by an immense shockwave was consistent with a powerful blast. Secondly, Davenport and others pointed to what they described as vitrified areas within the ruins, patches of fused, glass-like material. They argued that such vitrification could only occur under extremely high temperatures, far exceeding those achievable by conventional fires. The temperatures required to melt brick and stone into glass are indeed exceptionally high, leading some to speculate about an unnatural heat source. These areas, though small and localized, were presented as direct evidence of a catastrophic energy release. Furthermore, proponents of the radiation theories highlighted the presence of what they claimed were abnormally high levels of radiation in parts of the ruins, particularly around the skeleton sites. While specific scientific studies confirming these claims are largely absent from peer-reviewed literature, the notion that the skeletons themselves exhibited signs of radiation exposure became a popular talking point. The idea was that the victims were not merely killed by a blast, but were also subjected to intense radiation, explaining their unusual state. These theories often draw parallels with descriptions in ancient Indian texts, particularly the Mahabharata, which contains vivid descriptions of a devastating war and weapons that unleash immense destructive power, often interpreted as resembling atomic warfare. Passages describing a single projectile charged with all the power of the universe, an incandescent column of smoke and flame as bright as 10,000 suns, and a blinding flash which turned ordinary things into a charred waste, are cited by proponents of the ancient nuclear hypothesis as evidence that such advanced weaponry existed in antiquity. While these literary interpretations are fascinating, they are not, in themselves, archaeological evidence. However, the scientific community largely dismisses these strange radiation theories as pseudoscience, citing a lack of credible evidence in the presence of more plausible explanations. The primary critiques revolve around several points. Firstly, the vitrified areas, while present, are extremely limited in extent. Geologists and archaeologists argue that such vitrification can occur naturally under specific conditions, such as lightning strikes or intense localized fires fueled by highly flammable materials, which could have been present in a bustling ancient city. Moreover, the scale of vitrification in Mohenjo-Daro is minuscule compared to the widespread melting and fusion seen at actual nuclear test sites. Secondly, the claims of elevated radiation levels have not been substantiated by rigorous, independent scientific studies. No reputable archaeological or geological survey has ever confirmed significant or anomalous residual radiation at Mohenjo-Daro. Even if some very low levels of radiation were detected, they could be attributed to natural background radiation, which is ubiquitous in the environment, or to the natural decay of certain minerals. Without clear, documented and peer-reviewed scientific data, the radiation claims remain speculative at best. Thirdly, the skeletal evidence, while intriguing, does not definitively point to a nuclear event. The scattered nature of the skeletons can be explained by post-depositional processes, such as scavenging, erosion, or the collapse of structures over time, shifting the bodies from their original resting places. The sudden death postures, while dramatic, do not uniquely indicate a nuclear blast. People fleeing, falling during an earthquake, or succumbing to an epidemic could also exhibit such postures. Furthermore, if a nuclear explosion had occurred, there would be widespread and undeniable evidence of immense heat, pressure and radiation damage to the bones themselves, far beyond what has been observed. Bone fusion, fracturing patterns consistent with immense shockwaves, and distinct signs of radiation sickness would be expected. Such evidence has not been found. The prevailing scientific consensus on the abandonment of Mohenjo-Daro and the presence of the skeletons leans towards a more complex and gradual decline rather than a single catastrophic event. The abandonment without destruction theory is still widely debated and accepted within mainstream archaeology. The city, along with other major Indus Valley sites, appears to have gradually declined and been abandoned over a period, rather than suffering a sudden violent end. Several factors are thought to have contributed to this decline. Environmental changes are a major contender. The Indus Valley civilization was heavily reliant on the Indus River and its tributaries. Changes in river courses, such as the drying up of the Ganga-Hakra river system, which some identify as the ancient Saraswati River, or shifts in monsoon patterns, could have led to severe agricultural stress, widespread famine, and population displacement. A series of prolonged droughts, for instance, could have made it unsustainable to maintain large urban centres like Mohenjo-Daro. Furthermore, there is evidence of decline in the sophisticated urban planning and public works at Mohenjo-Daro in its later phases. The drainage systems, once a hallmark of the city's ingenuity, show signs of neglect. Houses were built encroaching on streets, and the careful grid plan began to break down. This suggests a weakening of central authority, a decline in civic organisation, and perhaps a gradual emigration of the population as living conditions deteriorated. The presence of the scattered skeletons, while certainly dramatic, is interpreted by mainstream archaeologists as isolated incidents, perhaps victims of localised skirmishes, common street violence, or even a sudden epidemic that caused rapid death and prevented proper burial. Given the long period of occupation, it is not unexpected to find some unburied remains. The lack of a large-scale mass grave or widespread battlefield evidence further supports this view. Some scholars suggest that the skeletons might represent victims of banditry or small-scale raids during the city's declining phase, when central control weakened. The 365 AD tsunami in Alexandria. On July 21, 365 AD, a catastrophic event unfolded in the eastern Mediterranean, forever altering the landscape and lives of those residing along its shores. This was no ordinary tremor, but a powerful earthquake that served as the precursor to a devastating tsunami, a wave of immense proportions that swept away coastal cities, leaving destruction and death in its wake. The epicenter of this seismic upheaval was located near the island of Crete, a region known for its active fault lines. The sheer force of the earthquake, estimated to be around magnitude 8.0 or higher, was enough to cause widespread structural damage across a vast geographical area, extending from Greece to Egypt. Buildings crumbled, foundations cracked, and the ground itself buckled under the immense strain. Contemporary accounts, though sometimes embellished with the dramatic flair of ancient chroniclers, provide a chilling glimpse into the immediate aftermath of the earthquake. Saint Jerome, a Christian scholar living at the time, described the devastation in vivid terms, noting how the earth groaned and trembled, and how cities were swallowed by the sea. These early observations, while lacking the scientific precision of modern seismology, nonetheless conveyed the scale of the disaster. The earthquake's primary impact was felt most acutely on Crete itself, where archaeological evidence, unearthed centuries later, points to widespread destruction of settlements and infrastructure. Roads were ripped apart, harbours were submerged, and entire villages were reduced to rubble. However, the earthquake was merely the opening act of a two-part tragedy. The true horror arrived in the form of a colossal tsunami, generated by the massive displacement of the seafloor caused by the earthquake. The mechanics of tsunami generation, though understood with greater clarity by modern scientists, were a terrifying mystery to the people of the 4th century AD. They likely witnessed the inexplicable retreat of the sea, a phenomenon often observed before a tsunami strikes, followed by the terrifying surge of water. This withdrawal of the sea, a telltale sign of an impending tsunami, would have left fish stranded on the exposed seabed and created an eerie silence, a moment of unnatural calm before the storm. The tsunami's destructive power was most famously felt in Alexandria, the bustling metropolis of ancient Egypt. This great city, a centre of learning, commerce, and culture, was particularly vulnerable due to its low-lying coastal location. The wave, estimated to have reached heights of several metres, crashed into Alexandria with unimaginable force. Buildings near the harbour were obliterated, ships were lifted from their moorings and carried inland, and countless lives were swept away. Ammianus Marcellinus, a Roman historian, provided one of the most detailed and harrowing accounts of the tsunami's impact on Alexandria. He described how ships were tossed onto rooftops, how the sea transformed into a raging torrent, and how the bodies of the drowned littered the streets. This vivid description, though perhaps slightly exaggerated for dramatic effect, nonetheless painted a grim picture of the widespread devastation. He spoke of how the earth, which had for some time been shaken with repeated tremblings, at last reared up and broke forth in a terrible eruption. This suggests a prolonged period of seismic activity before the main shock. He further detailed how the waves of the sea, which had been agitated by the fury of the storm, having passed their usual bounds, overflowed the land and destroyed houses and trees. What's even more interesting is that scientists, much later studying the geological record, discovered compelling evidence that corroborated these ancient accounts. On this day, specifically in the late 20th and early 21st centuries, geologists and paleoseismologists began to uncover physical traces of the 365 AD tsunami. Sedimentary layers containing marine deposits found far inland from the current coastline in regions like Crete and Egypt provided irrefutable proof of a massive inundation event. These layers, often characterized by a chaotic mix of sand, shells, and marine debris, were distinct from normal alluvial or wind-blown deposits. By analyzing these layers, scientists were able to date the event with remarkable precision, aligning perfectly with the historical records of 365 AD. Furthermore, scientists saw evidence of uplifted ancient shorelines on Crete. On this day, through meticulous geological surveys, researchers identified ancient beach deposits and marine terraces that were elevated above the modern sea level. This uplift, which occurred in varying degrees across the island, was a direct consequence of the powerful earthquake. The western part of Crete experienced a significant uplift, in some areas as much as 9 meters, while the eastern part subsided. This differential vertical movement of the Earth's crust was a key factor in generating the massive tsunami. The uplifted sections of the coastline serve as a stark reminder of the immense forces at play during such seismic events. The discovery of these uplifted shorelines was crucial in understanding the precise mechanism of the earthquake and its connection to the subsequent tsunami. Scientists also utilized methods like radiocarbon dating of organic materials found within the tsunami deposits to further refine the timeline of the event. On this day, samples of shells, plant fragments, and even human artifacts embedded within the tsunami layers were meticulously analyzed. The results consistently pointed to the mid-4th century AD, providing independent scientific validation for the historical accounts. This interdisciplinary approach, combining historical research with cutting-edge geological and archaeological techniques, allowed for a much more comprehensive understanding of the 365 AD disaster. The impact of the tsunami extended far beyond Alexandria. Coastal settlements across the eastern Mediterranean, including those in Greece, Cyprus, and even parts of the Levant, experienced varying degrees of devastation. While Alexandria bore the brunt of the attack, the ripple effect of the disaster was felt across the entire region. The economic and social consequences were immense. Trade routes were disrupted, agricultural lands were salinized by saltwater inundation, and countless communities were displaced. The event undoubtedly contributed to the broader instability and challenges faced by the Roman Empire during this period. What's even more interesting is that scientists, through advanced modelling techniques, were able to simulate the propagation of the 365 AD tsunami. On this day, using bathymetric data, information about the depth of the ocean floor, and seismic parameters derived from the geological evidence, researchers created computer models that showed how the tsunami waves would have travelled across the Mediterranean. These simulations demonstrated how the initial displacement near Crete would have generated waves that radiated outwards, impacting different coastlines at different times and with varying intensity depending on the local topography and coastline orientation. These models helped confirm the widespread nature of the tsunami and provided insights into why certain areas were more severely affected than others. For example, the model showed how the shape of the coastline around Alexandria would have funneled the waves, amplifying their destructive power. The 365 AD tsunami also played a role in shaping the historical narrative and cultural memory of the time. The event was seen by some as a divine punishment, a manifestation of the wrath of the gods, or as a sign of the end times. This interpretation, common in ancient societies facing inexplicable natural disasters, influenced religious beliefs and artistic depictions. For instance, the destruction of Serapeum in Alexandria magnificent temple dedicated to the god Serapis, was sometimes attributed to the tsunami, further reinforcing the idea of divine intervention. While modern science offers a more rational explanation for the event, the historical accounts provide a fascinating insight into how people in the past grappled with such overwhelming catastrophes. On this day, further archaeological excavations in Alexandria and other affected coastal cities have continuously revealed more evidence of the tsunami's impact. For instance, excavations of ancient port facilities in Alexandria have uncovered layers of debris consistent with a sudden and massive inundation, with dislodged masonry and pottery fragments mixed with marine sediments. These discoveries continue to paint a detailed picture of the scale of the destruction and provide tangible links to the historical accounts. The discovery of the remains of boats far inland from the current coastline, along with other marine artifacts, provides direct physical evidence of the incredible force with which the water rushed ashore. Scientists also saw that the 365 AD event was not an isolated incident in the geological history of the Mediterranean. On this day, through studies of deep-sea sediment cores, researchers have identified multiple layers of turbidites, sediment deposits formed by underwater landslides or strong currents, often triggered by earthquakes and tsunamis, which indicate a long history of similar large-scale seismic and tsunami-genic events in the region. This broader understanding of the Mediterranean's geological activity places the 365 AD tsunami within a larger context of recurring natural hazards, highlighting the enduring risk to coastal populations in this tectonically active zone. The Mediterranean basin is crisscrossed by numerous fault lines where the African and Eurasian plates are in constant collision, making such events an inevitable part of its geological past and future, the day Tall El-Hammam burned. Tall El-Hammam, also known as Tall El-Hammam or Tall El-Hammam, stands as a prominent archaeological site situated in the Amman Governorate of Jordan. Its location in the eastern Lower Jordan Valley, approximately 11.7 kilometers east of the Jordan River and 12.6 kilometers northeast of the Dead Sea, positions it within a historically significant region. The site itself is a substantial tell, a man-made mound composed of numerous layers of human occupation, spanning an area of about 36 hectares. It features a distinct upper tall, rising approximately 30 meters above the surrounding plain, and an expansive lower tall extending to the southwest. The occupational history of Tall El-Hammam is extensive, beginning in the late Chalcolithic period, 4th millennium BCE, and continuing through the early, intermediate, and Middle Bronze Ages, and into the Iron Age II, Hellenistic, and Roman periods. During the Middle Bronze Age, specifically MB2, roughly 1800 to 1550 BCE, the city reached its zenith, becoming the largest continuously inhabited Bronze Age urban centre in the southern Levant, characterised by the construction of significant fortifications. The sheer size and continuous occupation of Tall El-Hammam for millennia underscore its importance as a major urban centre in the Middle Bronze Age Levant. The destruction of such a robust, enduring civilization represents a significant archaeological event, regardless of the ultimate cause. Archaeological excavations at Tall El-Hammam, initiated in 2005 under the direction of Stephen Collins of Trinity Southwest University, have unearthed compelling evidence of a widespread high-energy destruction event. This catastrophe occurred around 1650 BCE, approximately 3,600 years ago, marking an abrupt end to the Middle Bronze Age occupation of the city. The event left behind a distinctive city-wide destruction layer, providing clear indications of a catastrophic conclusion to the city's flourishing existence. The nature and origin of this destruction have become the subject of intense scientific scrutiny and debate. A prominent hypothesis, advanced by researchers including members of the Comet Research Group and the Trinity Southwest University excavation team, proposed that Tall El-Hammam was obliterated by a cosmic airburst of super Tunguska magnitude. However, this hypothesis and the primary scientific paper detailing it faced substantial academic criticism. This scrutiny ultimately led to its formal retraction by the journal Scientific Reports in April 2025. Adding another layer of complexity and controversy, the lead excavator controversially linked the site to the biblical city of Sodom. This claim, however, has been widely rejected by mainstream archaeologists and biblical scholars alike. The early and explicit association of the archaeological findings with a specific biblical narrative, rather than a purely empirical approach, introduced a framework that likely influenced subsequent scientific investigations and their reception. This pre-existing interpretive lens contributed to the intense debate and scrutiny that followed, touching upon fundamental issues of scientific objectivity and the intersection of faith and scholarly inquiry. The archaeological record at Tall El-Hammam presents a compelling narrative of an extraordinary destructive event. Excavations consistently revealed a distinct city-wide destruction layer, characterized by its carbon and ash-rich composition and thickness, ranging from approximately 1.5 to 2 meters. This layer contained pulverized and fragmented mud bricks, chaotically deposited debris, charred grains, soot, charcoal, and carbonized wood beams, suggesting that the materials were subjected to immense force rather than simply collapsing. Observations also included voids and layers formed by the burning of textiles such as rugs and tapestries. Within this destruction layer, materials indicative of anomalously high temperatures were discovered, far surpassing those typically associated with conventional fires or warfare. Melted pottery and potsherds, with outer surfaces fused into glass, along with melted mud bricks, roofing clay and building plaster were prevalent. Laboratory heating experiments on these materials indicated that temperatures exceeded 2000 degrees Celsius. Furthermore, the layer exhibited peak concentrations of high-temperature minerals and spherules, including diamond-like carbon diamondoids, Fe and C-rich spherules, Keiko-3 spherules derived from melted plaster, and melted grains of platinum, iridium, nickel, gold, silver, zircon, and chromite. The presence of shock metamorphic minerals, specifically shocked quartz grains displaying deformation features, and glass-filled shock fractures, suggested formation under very high pressures, estimated between 5 and 10 GPa. The physical devastation at Tall El-Hammam was immense. The event demolished over 12 meters of the 4 to 5 story palace complex and the massive 4-meter-thick mud brick rampart surrounding the city. Millions of mud bricks from the upper sections of the palace and other structures were found to be missing. Human remains discovered within the destruction layer exhibited extreme disarticulation and skeletal fragmentation, indicating that individuals were violently torn apart by a powerful explosion with a reported 100% mortality rate. Further analysis revealed a consistent southwest to northeast directionality in the scattered debris, including potsherds, charred grains, charcoal, and bone fragments observed across multi-meter distances within the destroyed city. This directional pattern was interpreted as evidence of high-velocity winds generated by the destructive event. A particularly striking finding was the presence of anomalously high salt concentrations, approximately 4 weight% within the destruction layer, significantly exceeding background levels of less than 1 weight%. This hypersalinity is believed to have rendered the soil infertile, contributing to a prolonged abandonment of Tall El-Hammam and an estimated 120 regional settlements within a 25-kilometer radius for a period of 300 to 600 years. Population levels in the area are estimated to have plummeted from tens of thousands to only a few hundred nomadic inhabitants following this environmental catastrophe. The combination of extreme temperatures, melting materials at over 2000 degrees Celsius, shock metamorphism, shocked quartz, pulverized debris, and the complete disarticulation of human skeletons represents a suite of evidence highly unusual for conventional destruction mechanisms such as warfare, earthquakes, or typical fires. This collection of observations points strongly to an extraordinary energy release, distinguishing it from common ancient city destructions. The widespread long-term abandonment of not just Tall El-Hammam, but over 100 regional settlements for centuries, coupled with the anomalous salt concentrations, further indicates a regional environmental catastrophe that rendered the land infertile. This suggests a destructive force with far-reaching environmental consequences beyond immediate physical damage. Based on the extensive archaeological and geological evidence, a group of researchers, including members of the Comet Research Group and the Trinity Southwest University excavation team, put forth a hypothesis attributing Tall El-Hammam's destruction to a cosmic airburst. They proposed that this event was of super Tunguska magnitude, implying an energy release several times greater than the 1908 Tunguska event in Russia. The Tunguska event involved a bolide approximately 50 meters wide that detonated with an energy equivalent to roughly 1,000 times that of the Hiroshima atomic bomb. To test the plausibility of such a destructive mechanism, hydrocode computer simulations were conducted. These models simulated a Type 2 or touchdown airburst, a scenario where the fireball reaches the Earth's surface, successfully reproducing the high-velocity, high-temperature jet that could generate melt glass, microspherules, and multi-GPA shock metamorphism observed at the site. The proponents of this theory presented the presence of shocked quartz, various melted materials, including pottery, mud bricks, and plaster, high-temperature minerals such as diamondoids, zircon, and chromite, and noble metals like platinum, iridium, nickel, gold, and silver as definitive scientific signatures of a cosmic impact event. The observed southwest to northeast directionality of the debris and the extensive demolition of massive structures were also deemed consistent with the expected effects of a powerful airburst. Regarding the long-term environmental consequences, the influx of salt, measured at approximately 4 weight% in the destruction layer, was attributed to the vaporization of Dead Sea brines or sedimentary salts by the airburst. This hypersalinity was then proposed as the cause for the subsequent soil sterilization and the prolonged abandonment of the region, rendering it unsuitable for agriculture for an estimated 300 to 600 years. While the primary scientific paper stated that the connection to the biblical Sodom was beyond the scope of this investigation, the researchers explicitly explored whether oral traditions concerning this catastrophic event could have served as the origin for the biblical account of Sodom's destruction in the book of Genesis. They noted that all the observations stated in Genesis are consistent with a cosmic airburst. The cosmic airburst hypothesis at its core aimed to provide a single high-energy mechanism that could coherently explain all the diverse and anomalous archaeological and geological evidence found at Tall El-Hammam, including the extreme temperatures, shock effects, widespread physical destruction, disarticulated human remains, directional debris, and the long-term regional environmental devastation. This attempt to explain multiple disparate phenomena with a single elegant solution represents an ambitious scientific endeavour. The explicit, though controversial connection to the biblical narrative of Sodom significantly amplified public interest and generated interdisciplinary discussion beyond traditional archaeological or geological circles. Akrotiri, the lost Minoan city. The lost Minoan city of Akrotiri, nestled on the modern-day island of Thera, now commonly known as Santorini, presents an extraordinary window into a vibrant Bronze Age civilization. This remarkably preserved prehistoric town is often referred to as the Minoan Pompeii, due to its dramatic demise and subsequent encapsulation by volcanic ash, a fate that froze its daily life in time for millennia. However, unlike Pompeii, Akrotiri offers a unique twist, the conspicuous absence of human remains within its buried structures, suggesting a timely evacuation before the final catastrophic eruption. This fact, along with the sheer wealth of archaeological findings, makes Akrotiri a site of immense intrigue and ongoing study. The history of Akrotiri stretches back much further than its sudden destruction. Evidence suggests human habitation in the area dates to the late Neolithic period, as early as the 4th millennium BC, and potentially even 5th millennium BC. Initially, it was a modest settlement focused on farming and fishing, cultivating grains like wheat and barley, along with olives and grapes for wine. By the early Bronze Age, around 3000 BC, Akrotiri began its transformation, evolving into a more significant settlement. Its strategic geographical position in the Aegean, particularly along key maritime trade routes connecting Crete, Cyprus, Syria, and even Egypt, became the bedrock of its prosperity. The Middle and Late Bronze Age, specifically between the 20th and 17th centuries BC, marked Akrotiri's zenith as a thriving urban centre. The city developed a sophisticated infrastructure that was remarkably advanced for its time. Excavations have revealed meticulously planned streets, some even paved, and an elaborate drainage system. This hydraulic engineering was so advanced that it included clay pipes for efficient wastewater management, and even evidence of indoor sanitation facilities within certain buildings, a testament to a highly organised society with a keen understanding of urban planning. The multi-storey buildings, some standing 2 or even 3 stories high, were constructed with stone and wood, demonstrating an understanding of structural engineering. These structures often featured large windows allowing for ample natural light and internal staircases, showcasing a comfortable domestic life for its inhabitants. The artistic expression found within Akrotiri is particularly striking. The vibrant wall paintings or frescoes that adorn the interiors of both private homes and public spaces are among the most celebrated discoveries. These frescoes depict a wide range of subjects, offering invaluable insights into the daily life, beliefs, and surrounding environment of the Akrotirian people. Unlike many ancient wall paintings that have faded over time, the Akrotiri frescoes retain their vivid colours and intricate details due to the unique preservation conditions offered by the volcanic ash. Themes frequently seen in these frescoes include nature, with detailed depictions of blooming lilies, swallows in flight, and various marine life, highlighting the islanders' deep connection to their environment. Animal figures such as blue monkeys and antelopes appear frequently, suggesting either extensive trade links with distant regions like Africa or India, or perhaps a symbolic mythological significance. Human activity is also vividly captured. The fisherman fresco, for instance, shows a young man holding a string of fish, emphasizing the importance of fishing to the city's economy. The boxing boys fresco portrays 2 young boys engaged in a boxing match, donned in protective gear, hinting at the existence of athletic training, possibly linked to religious or ceremonial activities. The saffron gatherers fresco, depicting women and monkeys collecting saffron, a valuable spice and dye, may symbolize a ritual offering to a goddess, underscoring the cultural and religious significance of saffron. The ladies' fresco in the House of the Ladies portrays women in elaborate Minoan-style robes and makeup, suggesting high status and participation in religious festivals. The flotilla fresco, a 6-metre-long artwork from the West House, is particularly noteworthy. It depicts a maritime procession with ships navigating between 2 ports, likely illustrating a religious festival or ceremonial voyage, and powerfully emphasises Akrotiri's extensive maritime connections and cultural importance as a trade hub. The trade networks of Akrotiri were indeed extensive. Its strategic location allowed it to serve as a vital maritime hub, linking the Minoans with distant lands across the Aegean and wider Mediterranean. Archaeological findings reveal imported luxury goods such as ivory, precious stones, and Camara-style pottery from Crete, as well as connections with the Greek mainland, the Dodecanese, Cyprus, Syria, and Egypt. Akrotiri was not only a recipient of goods but also a distributor, exporting local products like olive oil, wine, and textiles. The discovery of moulds and crucibles suggests that Akrotiri was an important centre for processing copper, a crucial commodity in the Bronze Age. This robust trade network contributed significantly to the city's affluence and facilitated the spread of cultural ideas and artistic styles, particularly from Minoan Crete, which heavily influenced Akrotirian culture. The presence of Linear A script inscriptions further solidifies the cultural ties with Minoan Crete. The demise of Akrotiri was a dramatic one, marked by the cataclysmic eruption of the Thera volcano, which is considered one of the largest volcanic explosions in recorded history. The exact date of this eruption remains a subject of ongoing debate among archaeologists and geologists, with radiocarbon dating suggesting a range between 1620 and 1530 BC, while archaeological evidence, primarily through comparisons with Minoan pottery, suggests a range of 1570 to 1500 BC. Regardless of the precise year, the events leading up to the eruption are becoming clearer. Before the main eruption, the island of Santorini experienced severe seismic foreshocks, strong earthquakes that caused significant damage to the city. Evidence of collapsed buildings and attempts to rebuild them has been found, indicating that the inhabitants were aware of the impending disaster. The accumulated debris and volcanic ash from these initial events even reached the 2nd floor in some places, leading to some first floors being converted into cellars and new entrances being added directly to upper levels. It is believed that these warning signs, coupled with earlier, perhaps minor, precursory tephra falls that would have given the population a few months' notice, allowed the residents of Akrotiri to evacuate the city. This explains the striking absence of human remains at the site, a stark contrast to Pompeii where inhabitants were caught unawares. It is surmised that the people likely fled as quickly as possible, leaving behind their belongings, which were then perfectly preserved by the subsequent layers of volcanic ash and pumice. The eruption itself involved multiple phases. A thin initial ash layer, showing no significant erosion, indicates that the population had time to escape before the more intense volcanic activity. The first major phase, known as BO1/Minoan A, deposited up to 7 meters of pumice and ash. Subsequent phases, BO2/Minoan B and BO3/Minoan C, involved pyroclastic surges and lava fountaining, which completely destroyed any structures not already buried and likely initiated the caldera collapse. The final major phase, BO4/Minoan D, was characterized by diverse activity including base surge deposits, lava flows and lahars, and completed the caldera collapse, generating massive tsunamis that would have impacted coastal areas across the Aegean, including Crete. The eruption spewed an estimated 15 billion tons of magma into the air, reaching heights of 32 kilometers. The thick layers of volcanic material, in some places reaching 40 meters, entombed Akrotiri, effectively creating a time capsule. The systematic excavation of Akrotiri began in 1967, led by the Greek archaeologist Professor Spiridon Marinatos. Marinatos had a theory, dating back to the 1930s, that the eruption of the Thera volcano might have caused the collapse of the Minoan civilization on Crete, and he initiated excavations to investigate this hypothesis. He began by opening a series of trial trenches across the bed of a ravine, guided by local farmers who had reported finding pottery and walls after heavy rains. Almost immediately, Marinatos realized he'd stumbled upon something extraordinary. Prehistoric buildings still standing 2 or 3 stories high, with almost every building showing evidence of rooms decorated with wall paintings. This impressive discovery led him to abandon his original theory, dedicating his time and resources to the systematic excavation of this remarkable city. One of the immediate challenges faced by Marinatos and his team was the preservation of the exposed structures. The same rains that had revealed the buried archaeology also posed a threat to its long-term survival. To protect the fragile mud brick structures and the delicate frescoes from the elements, a large bioclimatic shelter was constructed over the entire archaeological site, allowing excavations to continue under controlled conditions while preserving the uncovered remains. This protective roof, supported by 96 steel columns, is a key feature of the modern Akrotiri Archaeological Park. Since Marinatos' death in 1974, excavations have continued under the direction of Professor Christos Doumas. While only a fraction of the estimated 50-acre settlement has been uncovered, the discoveries continue to provide unprecedented insights into this ancient civilization. The House of the Ladies, the West House, and Zesta 4 Inches are some of the prominent buildings that have yielded a wealth of information, including architectural details, household artifacts, and the renowned frescoes. The meticulous process of uncovering artifacts has also involved innovative techniques, such as filling voids in the pumice with plaster of Paris to create casts of wooden furniture and other perishable items that had long since decayed, providing a glimpse into the material culture of Akrotiri. The site is not just a collection of ruins, it is a meticulously documented historical record. Archaeologists meticulously record the precise location and context of every artifact, from large storage vessels, pythois, found in storerooms, sometimes still containing remnants of grains, legumes and olive oil, to everyday tools, pottery and small figurines. This detailed approach allows researchers to reconstruct daily life, economic activities and social structures with remarkable accuracy. The absence of palatial structures suggests a more egalitarian society compared to Minoan Crete, with wealth distributed more broadly among its inhabitants, though the lavish decorations in some houses still point to a degree of affluence. Sodom and Gomorrah, myth or memory? The tale of Sodom and Gomorrah, recounted in the Book of Genesis, speaks of 2 cities destroyed by divine fire and brimstone due to their wickedness. This narrative has permeated religious and cultural thought for millennia, sparking debates about its historical reality. Is it a myth, a moral allegory, or a memory of a catastrophic event? The biblical account, specifically in Genesis 18 and 19, describes how Abraham pleaded with God to spare the cities if a certain number of righteous people could be found within them. Ultimately, only Lot, Abraham's nephew, and his family were deemed worthy of salvation. They were warned to flee and not look back as God rained down sulfur and fire, consuming Sodom and Gomorrah and the entire plain. Lot's wife, however, disobeyed the command and was turned into a pillar of salt. This dramatic narrative has long intrigued scholars, archaeologists and theologians. For centuries, the search for the physical remains of Sodom and Gomorrah has captivated many. The Bible places these cities in the plain of the Jordan, which is often understood to be near the southern end of the Dead Sea. This geographical detail has guided numerous archaeological expeditions in the region. One prominent candidate for the biblical Sodom is Tall El-Hammam, an archaeological site located in the southern Jordan Valley, about 14 kilometers northeast of the Dead Sea. Excavations at Tall El-Hammam began in 2005, led by Dr. Stephen Collins from Trinity Southwest University. What scientists discovered at this site began to draw significant attention. On this day, specifically around 2018, preliminary reports from the Tall El-Hammam dig site began to circulate, suggesting evidence of a catastrophic event that aligned strikingly with the biblical description. What's even more interesting is that scientists saw signs of an airburst event, a massive explosion in the atmosphere that could have leveled the city. This was not a typical earthquake or volcanic eruption. The archaeological layers revealed a widespread destruction layer, indicative of an intense heat event. Pottery shards found at the site were vitrified, meaning they had been subjected to extremely high temperatures, so intense that they melted into glass. This vitrification is a key piece of evidence, as it requires temperatures far exceeding those of ordinary fires. Scientists also observed something unusual in the destruction layer, evidence of shock. Materials were found that indicated rapid, extreme pressure, consistent with an atmospheric blast wave. Zircon crystals, for example, showed signs of shock metamorphism, a process that occurs under immense pressure. This particular observation was a significant departure from what would be expected from typical ancient warfare or natural disasters. The sheer scale and nature of the destruction suggested something extraordinary had occurred. Furthermore, on this day, around 2021, a study published in the journal Scientific Reports detailed findings from Tall El-Hammam that further supported the airburst hypothesis. Scientists presented evidence of melted building materials, including mud bricks and pottery, all pointing to temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Celsius, 3,600 degrees Fahrenheit. What's even more interesting is that scientists saw microscopic diamonds and other unusual minerals within the destruction layer. These tiny diamonds, called Lonsdaleite, are typically formed under conditions of extremely high temperature and pressure, often associated with impact events like meteorites. Their presence at Tall El-Hammam hinted at an extraterrestrial origin for the catastrophic event. The study also reported finding quartz grains that had been subjected to shock pressures greater than 5 gigapascals. This kind of shock pressure is characteristic of hypervelocity impacts. What's even more interesting is that scientists saw tiny spherical droplets of melted iron and silicon, consistent with an airburst event where a cosmic object exploded above the city. These findings were not isolated to a small area, but were distributed across the entire approximately 0.5-square-kilometer destruction layer of the city. Beyond Tall El-Hammam, other sites in the vicinity of the Dead Sea have also been considered as potential candidates for the biblical cities. Bab Eretchdra, located on the southeastern shore of the Dead Sea, was excavated extensively in the 1960s and 70s. This site, along with nearby Numeira, also showed signs of widespread destruction and abandonment around the same general period as Tall El-Hammam, though the nature of their destruction was often attributed to earthquakes or other natural phenomena. The findings at Tall El-Hammam, with their specific indicators of an airburst, offered a distinct explanation that set it apart. The time frame for the proposed event at Tall El-Hammam, estimated to be around 1650 BCE, Middle Bronze Age, generally aligns with the biblical timeline for Abraham, although biblical chronologies are often debated among scholars. The carbon-14 dating of burned materials at the site provided a consistent age for the destruction layer. Another aspect that has fascinated researchers is the description of the aftermath in the biblical narrative, the land becoming desolate and unfertile. The extreme heat and shockwave of an airburst event could indeed have rendered the soil infertile for a period, potentially explaining the biblical portrayal of the region as a wasteland after the destruction. What's even more interesting is that scientists saw evidence of a salt crust in the soil samples from the destruction layer, which could be consistent with the intense heat vaporizing salt from the Dead Sea and depositing it over the land. The geological context of the Dead Sea region is also relevant. It lies along a major fault line, the Dead Sea Transform, making it prone to seismic activity. However, the unique evidence of an airburst at Tall El-Hammam pointed to a cause beyond typical tectonic forces. The concentration of sulfur in the soil of the Dead Sea region, often linked to the biblical fire and brimstone, has also been a point of interest, though its direct connection to a catastrophic event remains a subject of scientific investigation. The biblical narrative emphasizes the moral dimension of the city's destruction, linking it to their wickedness. While archaeological discoveries cannot confirm the moral state of ancient inhabitants, they can provide insights into the physical events that may have inspired such narratives. The intensity and unusual nature of the destruction at Tall El-Hammam, as revealed by scientific analysis, would undoubtedly have been perceived as a cataclysmic event by any survivors or witnesses, potentially leading to religious interpretations of divine judgment. The discovery of shocked quartz, microscopic diamonds, and vitrified materials at Tall El-Hammam offered tangible physical evidence of an extraordinary event. These were not common archaeological finds. What's even more interesting is that scientists saw the distinct layering of ash and debris, indicating a sudden, overwhelming catastrophe rather than a gradual decline or conventional warfare. The uniform nature of the destruction across the city indicated a single, widespread event. The implications of these discoveries are significant. If the findings at Tall El-Hammam are indeed evidence of the destruction of a city by a cosmic airburst, it lends a compelling degree of scientific plausibility to a narrative that has long been considered purely mythological by many. It suggests that while the specific moral and religious interpretations of the event in the Bible are matters of faith, the underlying physical catastrophe may have a basis in memory passed down through generations. Herculaneum, the other buried city. It was August 24, 79 CE, when Mount Vesuvius, a volcano that had slumbered for centuries, erupted with a force that reshaped the landscape and sealed the fate of several Roman settlements. While Pompeii, famously buried under ash and pumice, often captures the imagination, Herculaneum, a smaller and wealthier town located on the slopes of the volcano, experienced a profoundly different kind of death, leading to a unique and remarkable state of preservation. The story of Herculaneum is one of intense heat, suffocating mud, and the astonishing survival of organic materials, offering an unparalleled window into Roman life. The initial phase of the eruption, which began around 1 p.m, involved a massive plume of ash and pumice rising into the sky. This material, lighter than rock, drifted eastward, raining down heavily on Pompeii. Herculaneum, situated to the west, was spared the initial heavy ashfall. Residents here likely observed the terrifying spectacle from a distance, perhaps feeling a false sense of security as the day progressed. However, their reprieve was short-lived. As the eruption continued into the night and the early morning of August 25th, the character of the volcanic activity changed. The column of ash and gas, no longer able to support its own weight, began to collapse, generating what are known as pyroclastic flows. These are fast-moving currents of hot gas and volcanic debris, incredibly dense and destructive. It was these flows, not falling ash, that would prove fatal for Herculaneum. The first pyroclastic flow, a searing wave of superheated gas and fine ash, swept down the slopes of Vesuvius towards Herculaneum. This flow, reaching temperatures estimated to be between 400 and 500 degrees Celsius, 750 to 930 degrees Fahrenheit, would have instantly vaporized flesh and caused instantaneous death to anyone caught in its path. The thermal shock was so extreme that brains were boiled and skulls exploded, leaving behind a remarkable and gruesome testament to the flow's intensity. On May 19, 1982, when archaeologists exploring the boat sheds on the ancient beachfront uncovered skeletons, the very first human remains at Herculaneum, they noticed the unusual preservation and condition of the bones, which was significantly different from the articulated skeletons found in Pompeii. This discovery immediately suggested a different mode of death. Later scientific analysis would confirm that these individuals had died from extreme heat. Following this initial surge, a series of subsequent pyroclastic flows, progressively thicker and more laden with volcanic material, inundated Herculaneum. These flows, moving at speeds of up to 100 km per hour, 60 miles per hour, acted like a concrete mixer, entombing the town under layers of highly consolidated volcanic rock, often several meters thick. The consistency of this material, a mixture of ash, rock fragments, and superheated gases, was akin to boiling mud. The intense pressure exerted by these flows, coupled with their extreme temperatures, is what set Herculaneum apart from Pompeii. While Pompeii was buried by relatively light, porous ash, Herculaneum was entombed by a dense, suffocating mass. This unique burial mechanism had a profound impact on preservation. In Pompeii, voids were left where bodies and organic materials decayed, allowing archaeologists to create plaster casts. In Herculaneum, the fine, wet ash that permeated every nook and cranny acted differently. Instead of creating voids, it often carbonized organic materials, preserving them in astonishing detail. Perhaps the most astonishing aspect of Herculaneum's preservation is the survival of wood. Unlike Pompeii, where wood typically decayed, leaving only impressions, Herculaneum boasts intact wooden beams, doors, and even furniture. For example, in the House of the Bicentenary, a perfectly preserved wooden bed frame was found. In the House of the Gem, a wooden lattice screen remains in situ. The intense heat of the pyroclastic flows, coupled with the rapid entombment, essentially carbonized the wood, transforming it into a hard, charcoal-like substance that has endured for nearly 2 millennia. When excavations first uncovered these wooden elements, their state was so unexpected that initial observers found it difficult to reconcile with typical archaeological findings from other sites. This preservation of wooden structures provides invaluable insights into Roman carpentry, joinery, and domestic architecture that simply do not exist anywhere else. The preservation of organic materials extends beyond wood. Food items such as loaves of bread, figs, and dates have been found transformed into charcoal. The carbonized remains of textiles, fishing nets, and even ropes offer glimpses into the daily lives and industries of Herculaneum's inhabitants. These discoveries are invaluable, providing tangible evidence of Roman diet, clothing, and crafts, pushing beyond what written records or stone artifacts alone can tell us. However, the most extraordinary discovery regarding organic material in Herculaneum concerns the Villa of the Papyri. This grand seaside villa, belonging to Julius Caesar's father-in-law, Lucius Calpurnius Piso Chersoninus, was found to contain an immense library of papyrus scrolls, an unprecedented find in the Roman world. When the villa was initially discovered in the 18th century, these scrolls, carbonized by the heat, were mistaken for logs of wood. It was only through the efforts of a Neapolitan scholar Antonio Piaggio and the patronage of the Bourbon monarchy that methods were developed to unroll and read these fragile documents. On June 19, 1753, the first attempt to unroll a scroll from Herculaneum took place. The process was agonizingly slow and delicate, often resulting in damage, but it marked the beginning of deciphering these ancient texts. The scrolls of the Villa of the Papyri, though challenging to read, offer a unique glimpse into ancient Greek philosophy, particularly Epicureanism, as many of the texts are works by the Epicurean philosopher Philodemus. The sheer volume of these scrolls, numbering almost 1,800, is unparalleled. What is even more interesting is that scientists in the 21st century have been able to apply advanced imaging techniques such as X-ray phase contrast tomography to virtually unroll and read the scrolls without physically damaging them. This technology, which began showing promising results around the early 2000s, allows researchers to detect the ink on the carbonized papyrus, which was previously invisible to the naked eye in traditional X-rays. This breakthrough has opened up new possibilities for understanding the intellectual life of the Roman elite and the wider philosophical landscape of the time. The fact that the ink, made from carbon-based materials, actually provided enough contrast against the carbonized papyrus to be detected by these specific imaging techniques is a testament to the unforeseen benefits of the carbonization process. The human remains found at Herculaneum also tell a compelling story, different from their Pompeian counterparts. While Pompeii has famous plaster casts of individuals caught in the ashfall, Herculaneum's victims perished from extreme thermal shock. For many years it was believed that most of Herculaneum's inhabitants had successfully evacuated. This belief was largely based on the initial paucity of human remains found within the town itself. However, the discovery of the boat sheds on the ancient beachfront in the early 1980s dramatically altered this understanding. In these boat sheds, hundreds of skeletons were found piled together, huddled as if seeking refuge. These individuals, likely awaiting rescue or attempting to escape by sea, met their end in the first, most intense pyroclastic flow. The rapid burial by superheated volcanic material led to a unique form of bone preservation. Unlike Pompeii, where bones often retain some collagen and can be dated using radiocarbon methods more easily, the intense heat at Herculaneum essentially cremated the soft tissues and superheated the bones, leading to a process known as calcination. This made them very brittle but also incredibly well preserved in terms of their inorganic structure. When these skeletons were first examined, scientists observed a reddish-brown residue on some of the bones, which upon analysis was determined to be vitrified brain matter. This extremely rare phenomenon, a result of the brain tissue being instantly heated to such high temperatures that it turned into glass, provided irrefutable evidence of the extreme thermal shock experienced by the victims. This observation, first noted on some of the skeletons unearthed in the 1980s, was something that scientists had rarely, if ever, seen in such a context, and it immediately pointed to the unique and brutal nature of death in Herculaneum. Further archaeological exploration in Herculaneum has also revealed fascinating details about Roman domestic life. The preservation of multi-storey buildings, unlike many in Pompeii which collapsed under the weight of ash, allows for a more complete understanding of Roman urban planning and housing. The house of the relief of Telephus, for example, retains its second story, offering a rare glimpse into upper-level Roman residences. The elaborate frescoes and mosaics, often in better condition than those in Pompeii due to the protective layer of volcanic material, showcase the artistic tastes of Herculaneum's wealthy inhabitants. The House of Neptune and Amphitrite features an exquisitely preserved mosaic of the sea god and his consort, its vibrant colours still striking after nearly 2 millennia. The study of Herculaneum continues to yield new insights. Modern excavation techniques are far more refined than those of the 18th and 19th centuries, allowing for meticulous documentation and preservation. Scientists now employ advanced tools such as ground-penetrating radar to map buried structures before excavation, minimizing damage. The ongoing work at Herculaneum is not just about unearthing artifacts, it's about piecing together the narrative of a community, understanding the intricate details of their lives, and witnessing the devastating power of nature. Helike, Atlantis in Greece. Helike, a once flourishing ancient Achaean city, stood proudly on the southern coast of the Gulf of Corinth, a jewel of Hellenic civilization. Its fame in antiquity was considerable, particularly for its revered temple of Poseidon Helikonios, a sanctuary so significant that it attracted pilgrims and supplicants from across the Greek world. The city was a leading member of the Achaean League, a powerful confederation of city-states, and its influence extended far beyond its immediate territory. Ancient texts speak of its wealth, its political importance, and its cultural vibrancy, painting a picture of a thriving urban centre nestled in a fertile plain, overlooking the shimmering waters of the Gulf. Yet, this prosperous existence was destined for a sudden and catastrophic end, an event so dramatic and complete that it would echo through history, drawing comparisons to the legendary Atlantis and fueling centuries of speculation and search. The night of its destruction, in 373 BCE, was one of unparalleled terror and devastation. Ancient chroniclers, including the historian Diodorus Siculus and the geographer Strabo, provide chilling accounts of the events that unfolded. For several days leading up to the catastrophe, unusual portents were observed. Animals, particularly mice, snakes, and other creatures, were seen abandoning the city en masse, fleeing towards higher ground. This exodus of wildlife, often interpreted as a sign of impending natural disaster, went unheeded by the human inhabitants, who perhaps attributed it to unrelated phenomena or simply dismissed it as peculiar behaviour. Then, in the dead of night, a massive earthquake struck. The ground beneath Helike convulsed violently, tearing apart buildings and causing widespread destruction. The tremors were so severe that they were felt far across the Peloponnese, shaking cities and settlements for miles around. But the earthquake was only the prelude to an even more terrifying force. Immediately following the seismic shock, the sea, which had moments before been calm, began to behave in an unnatural manner. A colossal tsunami, generated by the underwater displacement caused by the earthquake, surged inland with unimaginable speed and power. The wave, described as being of immense height, swept over Helike, engulfing the entire city and its surrounding plain. The force of the water was so overwhelming that it dragged buildings, trees, and people into the churning depths. Within a matter of hours, Helike, along with the neighbouring town of Bura, was utterly submerged. The accounts state that not a single inhabitant survived, and the city simply vanished beneath the waves, leaving no trace on the surface. For centuries afterward, fishermen sailing over the area claimed to see the submerged ruins of Helike, its temples and statues visible through the clear waters, a ghostly reminder of the city that had been swallowed by the sea. Pausanias, writing centuries later, recounted how sailors could still discern the outlines of the city walls, and even a bronze statue of Poseidon standing defiant in its watery grave. This vivid imagery only deepened the mystery and allure of the lost city. The legend of Helike's sudden disappearance, coupled with its watery grave, naturally drew parallels with Plato's account of Atlantis, another advanced civilization swallowed by the sea in a single day and night. While Atlantis remains firmly in the realm of myth and philosophical allegory, Helike was a historically attested city, its destruction a documented event. This distinction made Helike a tangible target for archaeological investigation, a real-world Atlantis waiting to be found. The challenge, however, was immense. The coastal plain of Achaea is a geologically active region, characterized by significant seismic activity, uplift, and subsidence, as well as extensive alluvial deposition from rivers flowing into the Gulf. Over the millennia, layers of sediment carried by these rivers would have buried any submerged ruins, making their detection incredibly difficult. The modern quest for Helike began in earnest in the late 20th century, driven by the persistent efforts of a dedicated team of archaeologists and scientists. Among the most prominent figures in this endeavour were Dora Katsonopoulou, a Greek archaeologist, and Stephen Sota, an American astronomer and geologist. Their collaboration, initiated in the 1980s, marked a systematic and interdisciplinary approach to solving the ancient mystery. They understood that finding Helike would require more than just traditional archaeological excavation. It would necessitate a deep understanding of the region's geology, seismicity, and coastal geomorphology. Their initial research focused on meticulously re-examining ancient texts, not just for direct mentions of Helike, but for subtle clues about the local environment, the nature of the catastrophe, and the subsequent changes to the coastline. They also delved into historical maps and geological surveys, attempting to reconstruct the ancient landscape and identify areas where subsidence might have occurred. A crucial aspect of their methodology involved seismic profiling, a technique typically used in oil and gas exploration, adapted for archaeological purposes. This involved sending sound waves into the ground and recording the echoes, which could reveal subsurface structures and geological layers. They also employed core sampling, extracting long cylinders of earth to analyse the stratigraphy, the layers of sediment, for evidence of ancient habitation and catastrophic events. The challenges they faced were formidable. The plain of Helike is crisscrossed by numerous rivers, and over centuries these rivers had deposited vast amounts of silt and sand, burying the ancient coastline and any submerged ruins under many meters of sediment. The exact location of the ancient shoreline was itself a matter of debate, as the coastline had shifted considerably due to both natural processes and human intervention. Furthermore, the seismic activity that destroyed Helike also meant that the land itself had undergone significant vertical movements, making predictions about the original depth of the city difficult. The breakthrough in the search for Helike came in the late 1980s and early 1990s. While it is difficult to pinpoint a single on-this-day moment for such a complex archaeological discovery, the period between 1988 and 1994 was particularly significant. In 1988, initial seismic surveys revealed anomalous subsurface structures in the plain of Helike, suggesting the presence of buried archaeological remains. These findings encouraged further, more targeted investigations. By 1994, the team, now known as the Helike Project, had narrowed down a promising area. It was not under the sea in the traditional sense, but rather beneath the modern alluvial plain, several kilometres inland from the present coastline. This seemingly paradoxical location was a testament to the dramatic geological changes that had occurred since 373 BCE. The land had subsided significantly during the earthquake, and subsequent riverine deposition had built up the plain, effectively burying the ancient coastal city under land. What was found was nothing short of extraordinary. The archaeological team began to uncover evidence of a thriving Bronze Age settlement, dating back to the Mycenaean period around 1600 to 1100 BCE, which was a significant discovery in its own right, predating the classical Helike. This indicated a long history of human occupation in the area. However, the ultimate prize, the classical city of Helike, remained elusive for a while longer. The team persisted, meticulously analysing core samples and conducting further geophysical surveys. Then, in 2000, a truly definitive discovery was made. The archaeologists unearthed a significant portion of a classical city, including walls, roads, and pottery fragments, all perfectly preserved beneath layers of sediment. The pottery in particular provided crucial dating evidence, confirming that the site was indeed from the classical period, aligning with the time of Helike's destruction. Even more compelling was the discovery of coins minted in Helike, bearing the distinctive image of Poseidon, the city's patron deity. These artifacts provided irrefutable proof that they had indeed located the legendary lost city. What was even more interesting to scientists was the unique state of preservation of the ruins. Unlike many ancient cities that have been destroyed by earthquakes and subsequently rebuilt or plundered, Helike was sealed almost instantaneously by the combination of liquefaction and the tsunami. Liquefaction, a phenomenon where saturated granular material like sand or silt temporarily loses its strength and behaves like a liquid due to seismic shaking, caused the ground beneath Helike to lose its bearing capacity. Buildings would have sunk into the liquefied soil, and then, as the ground solidified again, they were encased in a protective layer of sediment. The subsequent tsunami then deposited more layers of fine silt and clay, effectively creating an anaerobic environment that prevented decay and preserved organic materials that would normally decompose. This geological time capsule meant that the city was not merely destroyed but entombed, offering an unparalleled glimpse into ancient life frozen at the moment of catastrophe. The Lisbon earthquake, fire, quake, wave. The morning of November 1st, 1755 dawned in Lisbon with a deceptive tranquility. A day of profound religious significance across Catholic Europe, All Saints' Day. The city, a bustling hub of imperial wealth and maritime power, was preparing for solemn observances, its numerous churches filled with congregants, their candles flickering in the dim light, their voices rising in prayer. Lisbon, with its grand palaces, its densely packed wooden houses, and its labyrinthine streets, stretched across 7 hills overlooking the broad estuary of the Tagus River, a gateway to the vast Portuguese Empire. It was a city of vibrant commerce, rich culture, and deep-rooted faith, seemingly immutable in its grandeur. Then, without warning at approximately 9:40 a.m., the ground began to tremble. It was not a gentle tremor, but a violent, wrenching motion that rapidly intensified into a series of catastrophic shocks. The initial jolt lasted for several agonizing minutes, perhaps as long as 6 or 7, a duration that felt like an eternity to those caught in its grip. Eyewitnesses described the ground as heaving and rolling like waves on a tempestuous sea, fissures opening and closing, swallowing people and objects. The shaking was so profound that church bells across the city, some weighing many tons, began to clang wildly, their mournful peals echoing through the collapsing urban fabric. Buildings, many constructed without deep foundations on unstable ground, crumbled almost instantly. Churches, packed with worshippers, became death traps as their heavy stone roofs and ornate facades disintegrated, burying thousands beneath tons of rubble. The Royal Palace, a magnificent structure on the Tagus waterfront, collapsed, as did the Grand Royal Opera House, which had only been completed the previous year. The very earth seemed to groan, and the air filled with the deafening roar of falling masonry, the screams of the injured, and the dust of pulverized stone. This was not a localized event. The seismic waves radiated outwards, felt as far away as Finland and North Africa, indicating an earthquake of immense power, later estimated to be between 8.5 and 9.0 on the moment magnitude scale, originating from a fault line in the Atlantic Ocean southwest of Portugal. As the ground finally settled, a terrifying silence descended, broken only by the cries of the wounded and the crackling of nascent flames. The earthquake had done its work, but its destructive power was far from spent. Almost immediately fires began to erupt across the devastated city. The timing of the quake on All Saints' Day proved tragically significant. thousands of candles, lit for religious services in homes and churches, were overturned by the violent shaking. Cooking fires in kitchens, lamps in residences, and the debris of shattered buildings provided ample fuel. The narrow, winding streets of old Lisbon, choked with rubble, became impassable, hindering any attempts at firefighting. Furthermore, a strong wind, perhaps a consequence of the atmospheric disturbances caused by the quake, fanned the flames, transforming isolated blazes into an inferno. The fires raged for days, some accounts claiming they burned for nearly a week, consuming what the earthquake had spared. Libraries, archives, and priceless works of art were reduced to ash. The Palace of the Inquisition, with its grim history, was consumed, its records destroyed. The Royal Library, containing over 70,000 volumes, vanished. The fire added another layer of horror, driving survivors from the ruins, forcing them towards the riverfront, seeking refuge from the relentless heat and smoke. It was to the river that many fled, believing the open space of the Tagus estuary offered safety. But the sea too held a terrible surprise. Approximately 40 minutes after the initial earthquake, a new and unsettling phenomenon occurred. The waters of the Tagus receded dramatically, exposing the muddy seabed, littered with lost cargo, shipwrecks, and the detritus of the harbour. This extraordinary sight, later understood as the trough of an approaching tsunami, drew many curious survivors onto the exposed riverbed, some to scavenge, others simply to witness the bizarre spectacle. It was a fatal curiosity. Moments later, the first of 3 massive waves, generated by the same undersea seismic event, surged into the estuary. The largest of these waves, estimated to be up to 6 meters 20 feet high in Lisbon, crashed into the city, sweeping away those on the exposed banks, destroying docks and carrying ships far inland. The force of the water was immense, adding to the already unimaginable devastation. The tsunami was not confined to Lisbon. Its destructive power was felt along the coasts of Portugal, Spain, and North Africa. In Morocco, coastal towns like Safi and Agadir were inundated, with significant loss of life. Its effects were even observed across the Atlantic, in the Caribbean, where harbour waters rose and fell unusually, and in distant Ireland and England, where lakes and rivers experienced seiches, a standing wave phenomenon. The combined assault of quake, fire, and wave left Lisbon in ruins, a landscape of charred rubble and drowned bodies. The immediate aftermath was one of unimaginable chaos and despair. Estimates of the dead in Lisbon alone ranged widely, from 10,000 to 100,000, with tens of thousands more across affected regions. The stench of death hung heavy in the air, mingling with the smoke from the still burning fires. Survivors, many injured and traumatized, wandered aimlessly, searching for loved ones, food and water. Looting became a grim reality in the absence of law and order. Amidst this devastation, the Marquis of Pombal, Sebastião José de Carvalho e Melo, then Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs and War, emerged as a figure of extraordinary resolve and pragmatism. His famous, chillingly direct command, "Bury the dead and feed the living," encapsulated his immediate priorities. He swiftly imposed martial law, organised relief efforts, dispatched troops to prevent looting, and arranged for the collection of bodies to prevent epidemics. His decisive actions were critical in preventing further collapse into anarchy and disease. Beyond the immediate physical destruction, the Lisbon earthquake sent profound shockwaves through the intellectual and religious landscape of Europe. Then in the throes of the Enlightenment, this era was characterized by a fervent belief in human reason, progress, and a generally benevolent, if not always directly intervening God. The dominant philosophical current, particularly influenced by Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, espoused the concept of the best of all possible worlds, arguing that despite apparent evils, the universe was perfectly ordered by God, and every event, even suffering, contributed to a greater, incomprehensible good. The Lisbon earthquake shattered this comforting philosophical edifice. How could such indiscriminate destruction, such immense suffering, be part of a benevolent, perfectly ordered plan? Voltaire, the celebrated French philosopher and satirist, was particularly incensed by the earthquake. In 1756, he penned his poem on the Lisbon disaster, a direct and scathing indictment of Leibnizian optimism. He questioned how a just and good God could permit such a catastrophe. arguing that the idea of all is well was a cruel mockery in the face of such widespread agony. He wrote, "If this is the best of all possible worlds, what then are the others?" His later and perhaps most famous work, the satirical novella Candide, or Optimism 1759, further lampooned this philosophy through the character of Dr. Pangloss, a staunch optimist who, despite enduring countless misfortunes, including a fictionalized version of the Lisbon earthquake, continues to insist that everything is for the best in the best of all possible worlds. Voltaire's works profoundly influenced public opinion, forcing a re-evaluation of philosophical optimism and the nature of evil. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, another prominent Enlightenment thinker, responded to Voltaire's poem with his own perspective, arguing that the earthquake's devastating effects were exacerbated by human choices, specifically the decision to build cities so densely and with such fragile structures. He suggested that if people lived more dispersed lives in nature, the death toll would have been far lower. This argument, while not absolving God, shifted some of the responsibility onto humanity, introducing a more human-centric view of vulnerability to natural disasters. The earthquake thus served as a catalyst, pushing philosophical thought towards more empirical observations and less purely metaphysical explanations for natural phenomena, fostering a nascent skepticism towards grand, all-encompassing theories of divine order. The religious aftermath was equally turbulent and complex. For many, particularly within the Catholic Church, the earthquake was immediately interpreted as a direct act of divine retribution, God's punishment for the sins of Lisbon. The city, with its colonial wealth, its perceived moral laxity, and its vibrant, sometimes decadent culture, was seen by some as ripe for divine judgment. Sermons across Europe, from pulpits in Rome to Protestant churches in London, echoed this theme of divine wrath. Pamphlets and theological treatises proliferated, dissecting the disaster as a clear sign of God's displeasure. However, the indiscriminate nature of the destruction presented a profound theological challenge. Churches, filled with the devout, collapsed just as readily as brothels. The pious and the wicked perished alike. This raised agonizing questions about divine justice and the concept of a benevolent, intervening God. How could such suffering be reconciled with a loving Creator? For some, it led to a deepening of faith, a call for repentance and moral reform. For others, it fueled doubt and skepticism, contributing to the broader secularization of thought that was already a hallmark of the Enlightenment. The traditional notion of divine providence, where God directly guides and protects, was severely tested by the sheer scale and randomness of the catastrophe. On the scientific front, the Lisbon earthquake proved to be a pivotal moment, marking the true birth of modern seismology. While explanations for earthquakes had historically ranged from subterranean winds to divine displeasure, the sheer magnitude and widespread impact of the 1755 event demanded a more systematic inquiry. The Marquis of Pombal, in his pragmatic approach to reconstruction, demonstrated a remarkable foresight that transcended mere rebuilding. On December 26, 1755, just weeks after the disaster, he dispatched a detailed questionnaire to every parish in the kingdom. This was an unprecedented act of scientific data collection. The questionnaire meticulously sought information about the earthquake's effects, the exact time it began, its duration, the number of aftershocks, the type of damage sustained by buildings, the behavior of animals before and during the tremor, the changes observed in wells and springs, and crucially the impact of the tsunami, including the initial recession of the waters. The responses, though varied in their scientific rigor, provided a treasure trove of empirical data, allowing early natural philosophers to begin piecing together a more coherent understanding of seismic events. Scientists across Europe began to analyze the observations. John Michel, an English geologist, utilized the data from Lisbon and other seismic events to propose in 1760 that earthquakes were caused by shifting masses of rock beneath the Earth's surface, a groundbreaking idea that laid the foundation for modern plate tectonics. He specifically noted the observations of the receding water before the tsunami, connecting it to the undersea disturbance. This marked a crucial shift from supernatural or purely speculative explanations towards empirical observation and the application of natural laws. The earthquake thus provided a powerful impetus for the development of geology and seismology as distinct scientific disciplines, moving the understanding of such phenomena out of the realm of divine mystery and into the domain of scientific inquiry. Port Royal, sunken sin city. Port Royal, nestled on the southern coast of Jamaica, was by the latter half of the 17th century a crucible of commerce, piracy, and profound excess. It was a city that defied conventional morality, a bustling hive where fortunes were made and lost with dizzying speed, and where the line between legitimate trade and outright buccaneering was often blurred to the point of non-existence. Known across the Atlantic as the wickedest city on earth, its reputation was well earned. Its streets teemed with privateers, merchants, enslaved individuals, artisans, and a transient population drawn by the promise of immense wealth. Gold, silver, and exotic goods plundered from Spanish galleons flowed through its wharves, fueling an economy of unprecedented extravagance. The city boasted an astonishing number of taverns, brothels, and gambling dens, far outstripping any other settlement of its size in the English colonies. Its grand houses, built of brick and stone, rose several stories high, a testament to the rapid accumulation of riches by its inhabitants. Ships from across the globe, laden with cargo and stories, perpetually crowded its deep natural harbour, making it the most important English port in the New World. It was a place of vibrant, chaotic life, a testament to human ambition and avarice, a city living on the edge, both literally and figuratively. The very foundation of Port Royal was precarious. Built largely on a spit of sand and coral that extended into the sea, an unstable base for such a dense and heavily constructed urban centre. This geological vulnerability, combined with the city's infamous moral decay, led many of its more pious contemporaries to view its eventual fate as divine retribution. And indeed, on a seemingly ordinary Wednesday, June 7, 1692, at approximately 11:43 in the morning, the city's extraordinary existence came to an abrupt and cataclysmic end. The air, which moments before had been filled with the clamour of merchants, the shouts of sailors, and the laughter from taverns, was suddenly rent by terrifying roar. The ground beneath the feet of its 6,500 inhabitants began to heave and convulse with unimaginable violence. The earthquake, estimated to be between a magnitude 7.5 and 7.8, struck with devastating force. It was not a single prolonged tremor, but a series of 3 distinct shocks, each more destructive than the last, occurring within a span of mere minutes. The first shock was severe, causing buildings to sway and cracks to appear. The second, however, was the truly annihilating blow. The sandy, waterlogged substratum, upon which much of Port Royal was built, underwent a phenomenon known as liquefaction. The solid ground, saturated with groundwater, momentarily lost its strength and behaved like a liquid. Buildings, some weighing hundreds of tons, were swallowed whole, sinking into the churning earth as if into quicksand. Streets buckled and split open, creating fissures that swallowed people and structures alike. The very landmass of the city began to slide and crumble into the sea. Eyewitness accounts, though few and often coloured by the trauma of the event, paint a horrifying picture. Reverend Emmanuel Heath, the city's rector, miraculously survived and later recounted how the earth opened and shut, swallowing people before their very eyes. He described seeing the steeple of his church, St. Paul's, collapse, and then the church itself being consumed by the earth. Ships in the harbour were capsized by the ensuing tsunamis, and those that remained afloat were tossed violently. The sea itself seemed to boil and recede, only to rush back in with immense force, dragging more of the city into its depths. In less than 10 minutes, 2/3 of Port Royal, including its most densely populated and wealthiest districts, had vanished beneath the waves, taking with it an estimated 2,000 of its inhabitants. Thousands more were injured, and many succumbed to disease in the days and weeks that followed, as the remaining parts of the city were overwhelmed by chaos, lack of sanitation, and the stench of death. The once proud city, a symbol of English power and illicit wealth in the Caribbean, was reduced to a submerged ruin, a silent testament to the raw power of nature. For centuries, Port Royal lay largely undisturbed beneath the waters of Kingston Harbour, a forgotten relic of a bygone era, its stories preserved by the very catastrophe that destroyed it. While some early salvage efforts were made by survivors and opportunistic divers in the immediate aftermath, recovering readily accessible valuables, the bulk of the submerged city remained untouched, protected by layers of silt and the anoxic conditions of the seabed. This unique environment, devoid of oxygen, proved to be an extraordinary preservative, preventing the decay of organic materials that would normally disintegrate in salt water. It was not until the mid-20th century that serious archaeological interest in the sunken city began to emerge. In the 1950s, pioneering underwater archaeologist Edwin Link initiated some of the first systematic explorations. His work, though limited in scope by the technology of the time, confirmed the incredible state of preservation and hinted at the treasures of information that lay buried. Link's expeditions demonstrated the feasibility of excavating the site and sparked renewed interest in Port Royal's submerged past. However, it was the relentless dedication of Robert Marks beginning in the 1960s that truly brought Port Royal back into the spotlight of underwater archaeology. Marks, an American adventurer and historian, spent years meticulously mapping and excavating portions of the sunken city. His work was arduous, carried out with rudimentary equipment compared to today's standards, but yielded astonishing results. It was during one of Marks's expeditions, specifically on a day in 1967, that one of the most iconic discoveries was made: a pocket watch, remarkably preserved, its hands frozen at precisely 11:43. This artifact provided chilling confirmation of the exact moment the earthquake struck, a poignant and tangible link to the disaster. Scientists examining this discovery were able to confirm the time of the earthquake, a detail that had previously been known only through historical accounts. The watch, encased in its own small time capsule of mud and silt, became a powerful symbol of Port Royal's sudden demise. Marks's extensive excavations uncovered not just isolated artifacts, but entire sections of buildings remarkably intact. He discovered a building believed to be a liquor house, complete with pewter tankards, bottles, and even the remnants of their contents. In other areas, he found a kitchen, its pots and pans still on the hearth, and a dining room with plates and utensils scattered, as if the occupants had just risen from a meal. Scientists observing these findings noted the extraordinary preservation of domestic scenes, providing an unparalleled snapshot of 17th century daily life. The way the buildings had collapsed and been preserved offered unique insights into 17th century construction techniques and the sheer force of the liquefaction event. They saw how walls had folded in on themselves, how floors had dropped, and how entire structures had settled vertically into the liquefied sand. Further groundbreaking work was conducted by a team from Texas A&M University, led by Dr. James Parent, starting in the late 1980s. This multi-year project employed more advanced archaeological techniques, including precise mapping, systematic excavation grids, and careful documentation. Their efforts focused on specific areas, revealing even more granular details about the city. On one particular day in 1990 during the Texas A&M project, archaeologists uncovered a well-preserved section of a building that included a large quantity of ceramics, including Chinese porcelain and locally made earthenware. Scientists analysing these pottery shards were able to trace trade routes and consumption patterns, revealing the global reach of Port Royal's commerce and the diverse origins of goods available to its inhabitants. They saw evidence of a thriving economy that imported luxury goods from across the world, alongside more utilitarian items. The Texas A&M team also made significant discoveries related to the city's infrastructure. They excavated parts of a street, complete with cobblestones and drainage systems, demonstrating the sophistication of the city's planning despite its rapid and often chaotic growth. Scientists examining the stratigraphy of the site, the layers of sediment and debris, were able to precisely map the extent of the subsidence and the direction of the land movement during the earthquake. They saw clear evidence of multiple fault lines and the massive displacement of Earth. Perhaps even more compelling were the organic materials recovered from the anoxic layers. Archaeologists found wooden furniture, leather shoes, textiles, and even food remains, all remarkably preserved. On a specific dive in 1989, a leather shoe was found, its stitching still visible, offering a tangible connection to an individual who walked the streets of Port Royal over 3 centuries ago. Scientists studying these organic artifacts gained invaluable insights into 17th century craftsmanship, dietary habits, and even fashion. They observed the intricate details of woodworking and leatherwork that rarely survive from this period in terrestrial archaeological sites. The preservation of these delicate items provided a unique window into the material culture of the time, far beyond what could be gleaned from written records or less well-preserved sites. Human remains were also occasionally encountered, providing sombre but crucial information. While not a focus of the excavations, when found, they were meticulously documented. Scientists observed the positions of these remains, which often indicated the suddenness and violence of the event, with individuals caught in the act of daily life, unable to escape. One notable instance involved the discovery of a skeleton believed to be a young woman, found near a collapsed wall, offering a grim reminder of the human cost of the disaster. These observations allowed scientists to reconstruct aspects of the final moments of the city's inhabitants, understanding how they were overwhelmed by the collapsing structures and the liquefying ground. The flood that shaped China, the ancient annals of China, steeped in legend and historical record, recount a cataclysmic deluge that once engulfed the land, a flood so immense it threatened to erase all human habitation. Central to this narrative is the figure of Great Yu, a legendary sage king whose tireless efforts are credited with taming the raging waters of the Yellow River, thereby laying the foundations for China's first dynasty, the Xia. This tale, passed down through generations, describes a world plunged into chaos, where mountains were submerged and the plains became an endless sea, a state of affairs that persisted for decades. The traditional accounts emphasize Yu's unique approach to flood control, a stark contrast to the failed methods of his father, Gun. While Gun attempted to dam the waters, building barriers that ultimately proved futile against the immense pressure, Yu advocated for a strategy of dredging, channeling and guiding the waters, allowing them to flow naturally to the sea. He is said to have spent 13 years on this monumental task, traversing the land, personally surveying the terrain, and directing the construction of canals and ditches that would carve new pathways for the river, draining the inundated lands. The scale of this undertaking, as described in texts like the Shujing, Book of Documents, and the Shiji, Records of the Grand Historian, is truly staggering. Yu is depicted as a selfless leader, so dedicated to his work that he passed his own home 3 times without entering, even when his wife gave birth. His success in bringing order to the flooded realm is presented as the ultimate legitimizing factor for his rule, marking a pivotal transition from a tribal society to a more centralized dynastic state. The myth attributes to Yu the division of China into the 9 provinces, a geographical and administrative framework that reflected the newly drained and organized land. This narrative has profoundly shaped Chinese identity, emphasizing the importance of collective effort, engineering prowess, and a harmonious relationship with nature. The taming of the Yellow River, in this legendary context, was not merely an engineering feat, but a civilizing act, transforming a chaotic wilderness into a habitable and cultivable domain. However, the question of whether this epic flood and Yu's heroic endeavors are purely mythical or rooted in a geological truth has long fascinated historians and scientists alike. The Yellow River, known as Huanghe, has always been a formidable force of nature, earning the moniker China's Sorrow due to its propensity for devastating floods and dramatic shifts in its course. Originating in the Bayanhar Mountains in Qinghai Province, it flows for thousands of kilometers across the vast Loess Plateau, picking up an immense amount of fine yellowish sediment. This sediment, carried downstream, gives the river its distinctive color and, crucially, contributes to its tendency to build up its riverbed, often higher than the surrounding plains, making it highly susceptible to bursting its banks. Historical records are replete with accounts of the Yellow River changing its course, sometimes by hundreds of kilometers, creating new deltas and inundating vast agricultural lands. The inherent instability of the Yellow River system suggests that large-scale flood events would have been a recurring and defining challenge for early inhabitants of the North China Plain. In recent decades, a compelling body of geological and archaeological evidence has emerged that lends credence to the idea of a massive flood event occurring around the time traditionally associated with Yu's reign. One of the most significant breakthroughs came from the Lajia archaeological site in Qinghai Province, along the upper reaches of the Yellow River. This site, often referred to as the Pompeii of China, preserves a snapshot of a Bronze Age settlement tragically buried by a sudden catastrophe. What makes Lajia particularly intriguing is the discovery of human skeletons trapped in collapsed dwellings, indicating a rapid and unexpected demise. More strikingly, in 2005, during excavations at Laacher, archaeologists uncovered a well-preserved bowl of noodles, carbon dated to approximately 4,000 years ago, suggesting a meal abruptly interrupted. This discovery, while fascinating in its own right, pointed to a sudden catastrophic event. What scientists observed at Laacher, and what became even more interesting, was the geological context of the site's destruction. Researchers, including a team led by Wu Qinglong from Peking University, began to piece together evidence of a colossal flood. They identified distinct flood sediments at Laacher, characterized by thick layers of dark, silty clay, distinct from the usual loess deposits. These sediments contained fragments of human bone and pottery, further indicating their association with the destruction of the settlement. The key to understanding the origin of this flood lay upstream. Scientists meticulously examined the geology of the Jishi Gorge, located approximately 25 kilometers upstream from Laacher. There, they discovered compelling evidence of a massive landslide that had occurred in the gorge, effectively damming the Yellow River. This landslide, formed by material tumbling from the steep valley walls, created a natural earthen dam that would have impounded a vast lake. The scale of this ancient landslide was immense, and what scientists saw was a natural dam approximately 200 meters high. The impounded water behind this natural barrier would have accumulated over a period, forming a lake that stretched for hundreds of kilometers upstream. The sheer volume of water held back by this temporary dam would have been enormous, creating immense pressure on the natural barrier. Geological analysis indicated that this dam eventually failed catastrophically. The water, once released, would have surged downstream in an immense outburst flood. Scientists calculated that the flood waters, released from the Jishi Gorge Dam, would have travelled at speeds of up to 200 to 300 meters per second, carrying an estimated 12 to 16 cubic kilometers of water. This volume is comparable to the largest known outburst floods on Earth, such as the Missoula floods that shaped the landscape of the Pacific Northwest in North America. The dating of this geological event was crucial to linking it to the Great U Flood myth. Radiocarbon dating of organic material within the flood sediments at Laacher, as well as of human remains found in the flood deposits, yielded a consistent age of approximately 3,900 to 4,000 years ago. This time frame aligns remarkably well with the traditional chronology for the beginning of the Xia dynasty, which is often placed around 2000 BCE. The synchronicity between the geological evidence of a megaflood and the mythical period of Yu's flood control efforts provides a tantalizing connection between legend and geological reality. What was even more interesting for the scientists was how the flood deposits thinned and became less destructive further downstream from the Jishi Gorge, suggesting a powerful, localized event that gradually dissipated. This pattern of deposition was consistent with an outburst flood originating from a breached natural dam. The implications of this discovery are profound. If the Jishi Gorge outburst flood is indeed the geological event that inspired the Great U Flood myth, it suggests that the myth, while embellished with heroic details, has a factual basis in a real catastrophic natural disaster. Such an event would have been transformative for the early agricultural communities in the Yellow River Valley. The sheer scale of the inundation would have necessitated a coordinated large-scale response, far beyond the capabilities of individual families or small tribal groups. The need for centralized leadership and organized labor to manage the aftermath, to drain the land, clear debris, and re-establish agricultural production would have been paramount. This environmental pressure could have been a powerful catalyst for the emergence of a more complex societal structure, precisely the kind of centralized authority that the Xia dynasty represents. Laacher See, the forgotten supervolcano. The Laacher See, a serene lake nestled in the Eifel mountain range of Rhineland-Palatinate, Germany, belies its dramatic past as the site of one of ancient Europe's most colossal volcanic eruptions. This event, now recognized as a significant chronostratigraphic marker across the continent, occurred around 13,000 years ago, leaving an indelible mark on the landscape, climate, and even human populations of the time. The eruption of the Laacher See volcano was a Plinian event, characterized by an enormous column of ash and gases ejected high into the stratosphere, and it is estimated to have had a volcanic explosivity index, VI, of 6, on a scale comparable to the 1991 eruption of Mount Pinatubo. The sheer volume of material expelled, some 20 cubic kilometres of eruptive products equivalent to 6.3 cubic kilometres of dense rock, speaks to the immense power of this ancient European supervolcano. The dating of the Laacher See eruption has been a subject of ongoing scientific inquiry and refinement. Early radiocarbon dating suggested an age of approximately 11,000 years before present, BP, often quoted as 11,000 to 50 BP, based on studies like those by Van den Boogaard and Schminke in 1985. However, the scientific community has continually sought greater precision. For instance, in 1995, Paul Van den Boogaard published 40R/39R ages of sanidine phenocrysts from Laacher See tephra, 12,900 years BP, chronostratigraphic and petrological significance in Earth and planetary science letters, providing a date of 12,900 years BP for the eruption. More recently, in a research paper, scientists challenged a high-precision radiocarbon date from 2021, which placed the eruption at 13,000 years ago. This newer research, involving scientists from Durham University, University of Oxford, Royal Holloway University of London, Systemic Limited, and Teesside University, suggests that the actual eruption took place 12,880 years ago, contending that the earlier radiocarbon dating may have been skewed by dead carbon or ancient carbon dioxide emitted from the magma chamber and absorbed by nearby vegetation like trees. This magmatic carbon contains no radiocarbon and would make samples appear older than they truly are. This perspective is further supported by the identification of a very large sulfur spike in the Greenland ice sheet, dated to roughly 12,870 years before the present, a strong indicator of a major volcanic event at that specific time. This alignment between the sulfur spike in ice cores and the revised eruption date for Laacher See is a compelling piece of evidence for many researchers. Other estimates, based on a combination of lake sediments, tree rings and ice cores, have placed the eruption between 12,880 and 12,980 calibrated years BP. In February 2019, a geochemically confirmed finding of the Laacher See tephra was reported directly east of the volcano in European lake sediment, Gradual See, Germany, correlating with an enhancement in magnetic susceptibility and an increase in niobium and phosphorus concentrations, which matched published Laacher See tephra data from proximal sites. This particular finding was thought to correspond to the middle phase of the eruption. The eruption itself was a complex series of events. Initial blasts, likely occurring in late spring or early summer, flattened trees up to 4 kilometers away. The magma opened a route to the surface, leading to an eruption that probably lasted for about 10 hours, with the volcanic plume reaching a height of perhaps 35 kilometers. This initial Plinian phase was followed by weeks or even months of continued activity, generating pyroclastic currents that inundated valleys up to 10 kilometers from the vent with sticky tephra. The interaction of magma with groundwater during these phases led to particularly explosive phreatomagmatic bouts, which intensified magma fragmentation and produced significant quantities of fine glassy tephra particles. Geological evidence, such as the thick deposits of pumice and ash, some reaching 60 meters or more in thickness close to the vent, provides a clear record of the eruption scale. For instance, pictures of the Laacher See crater, its tephra deposits at Wingertsberg, 2 kilometers south of the vent, and in situ excavated carbonized poplar trees near the village of Kruft all offer tangible proof of the event. Remains of charcoal and wood, recovered between 1958 and 1996 from various localities within the Laacher See Ignimbritus, up to 15 kilometers from the crater, have been crucial for dating efforts. Decadally resolved radiocarbon measurements of 3 in situ excavated poplar and birch stumps, found standing upright in pumice and ignimbrite deposits near Kruft, place the eruption between 13,150 and 13,050 calibrated years BP. One of the most remarkable aspects of the Laacher See eruption is the widespread distribution of its ash, or tephra. This distinct layer, known as the Laacher See tephra, LST, has been identified across an area exceeding 300,000 square kilometers. It stretches from central France to northern Italy and from southern Sweden to Poland, making it an invaluable tool for chronological correlation of archaeological and paleo-environmental layers across Europe. In the field, the tephra layer shows only slight indications of weathering, with its core completely unweathered. The bulk of the LST was carried northeast, depositing a broad swath of ash across present-day north-central and eastern Germany, with states like Hesse, Brandenburg, Mecklenburg, Western Pomerania, and Lower Saxony being particularly rich in suitable natural archives containing LST deposits. Isolated data points indicating airfall LST have also been found as far as northwest Belgium, the Netherlands, and Denmark, suggesting shifts in wind direction during the eruption. Even more remarkably, the most distal LST data point is currently located in northwest Russia, approximately 1,800 kilometers from the Laacher See, close to Lake Ladoga, identified indirectly through elemental enrichment. The unique combination of minerals in the Laacher See tephra, typically including brown amphibole, titanite, and edgerine augite, allows it to be identified even in cases where discrete layers and preserved shards are not present, relying on heavy mineral analyses. The impact of this massive eruption on the environment and ancient human populations was profound, though its precise role in larger climate shifts is still debated. The eruption's timing in the late spring or early summer coincided with the Allerod interstadial, a relatively warm period, and its immediate aftermath led to several years of cold summers and up to 2 decades of environmental disruption in Germany. Direct effects included ash deposition, acid rain, and potentially wildfires. The ash deposition would have negatively affected terrestrial vegetation, while increased precipitation could have favoured certain plant types. Acid rain would have resulted in the acidification of habitats, and the increased atmospheric albedo due to volcanic particles in the atmosphere could have caused a temporary decrease in temperatures in the northern hemisphere. The Laacher See eruption has been discussed as a possible trigger for the Younger Dryas, a period of global cooling that marked an abrupt relapse to near-glacial climate conditions in the North Atlantic and European realm. While some research initially suggested a direct link, more recent studies, such as the one linking the Laacher See eruption to a volcanic sulfur spike in a speleothem from Germany and then to the Greenland ice core record, date the eruption to 13,008 to 8 years BP 1950, demonstrating that it predated the onset of the Younger Dryas cooling by about 150 years. This would seem to reduce the likelihood of it being a direct trigger, though it may have contributed as part of a cluster of volcanic events. However, other researchers, acknowledging the complexities of radiocarbon dating influenced by volcanic carbon, still consider the Laacher See eruption a viable trigger for the Younger Dryas, aligning its revised date 12,880 years ago with a large sulfur spike in the Greenland ice sheet that had all the characteristics of the Laacher See eruption and occurred 130 years after the previously proposed date. This suggests a continued debate within the scientific community regarding the exact timing and direct causal link to the Younger Dryas. Beyond climate, the eruption had significant consequences for the local human populations of the Fedmesser culture. In the regions most heavily affected by ash fallout, such as the Thuringian Basin, there appears to have been a near-complete depopulation following the event. Conversely, populations in southwest Germany and France saw an increase, suggesting a displacement of communities. The thick tephra blanket in the eruption's near field covered and preserved a large number of archaeological sites from the late glacial period. However, there is a striking contrast in the number of sites prior to the eruption and the almost complete lack of sites dating to the period immediately after, specifically Greenland Interstadial 1A. This pattern of sites not being reoccupied until much later in prehistory strongly suggests a major reorganization of landscape use, or even a complete abandonment of affected regions. Archaeologists have proposed that the eruption led to significant demographic fluctuations along the northern periphery of late glacial human settlement, precipitating material culture transformations. For instance, in southern Scandinavia, these changes manifested as technological simplification and the loss of bow and arrow technology, coincident with the emergence of the regionally distinct Broma culture. Scientists have also explored the potential health hazards posed by the Laacher See tephra. Studies have shown that the tephra may have posed a health risk, and intriguingly, its hazard potential may have increased with distance from the vent due to the physical properties of the ash. One hypothesis, explored in detail by researchers, concerns possible fluoride poisoning. Volcanic eruptions introduce large amounts of chemicals into the atmosphere, which are then deposited in the environment via ash fallout. The Laacher See tephra, being phonolytic and rich in alkalis and volatiles, could have had a high fluoride content. The deposition of such fluoride-rich tephra may have contributed to making affected landscapes unsuitable for wildlife, and consequently for human foragers relying on those animals. The impact on prey animals would have had a cascading effect on human communities, potentially disrupting their food supply. The Laacher See volcano, although its last eruption was more than 10,000 years ago, and it is technically considered inactive by some definitions, is widely regarded by most experts as merely dormant. Evidence of continuing volcanic activity in the region includes moffetts, which are steady streams of cold carbon dioxide gas emitted from the east shore of the lake. These gas emissions are clearly observable in shallow water near the lake's edge, and also occur on dry ground. Furthermore, deep low-frequency DLF earthquakes have been observed beneath the Laacher See between 2013 and 2018. These earthquakes, too weak to be felt by humans without specialized equipment, occur at depths between 10 and 45 kilometers, ranging from the Earth's crust down to the upper mantle. Scientists interpret these DLF earthquakes as indications of ascending magmatic fluids that are slowly refilling a magma chamber beneath the volcano. While these signals are not interpreted as immediate precursors to an imminent eruption, they do suggest the presence and ongoing, slow recharge of magma reservoirs in the crust beneath the Laacher See. The process of filling and differentiating the upper magma chamber prior to the last eruption is estimated to have taken approximately 30,000 years. Geoscientists recommend intensified geochemical monitoring to analyse emitted gases and repeated geodetic measurements to detect any surface deformations, as well as specific geophysical investigations to map and characterise potential magma reservoirs. The ongoing research into the Laacher See system reflects a commitment to understanding the full scope of this ancient geological event and its implications for the future. Hiroshima, the modern flash-burned city. On the morning of August 6, 1945, at precisely 8:15 a.m. local time, the city of Hiroshima, Japan, was subjected to a singular and unprecedented event that would forever alter the course of human history and the understanding of warfare. A new type of weapon, an atomic bomb nicknamed Little Boy, was detonated in the sky above the city. The immediate result was a flash of light brighter than 1,000 suns, followed by an immense wave of heat, a crushing blast, and then, for many, an overwhelming silence broken only by the crackle of nascent fires and the cries of the injured. The connection to ancient cities, ravaged by forces beyond human control, was eerily present in Hiroshima's sudden transformation. Just as Pompeii and Herculaneum were entombed by the pyroclastic flows and ash of Mount Vesuvius in 79 AD, freezing moments of daily life in their final terrifying forms, so too was Hiroshima, instantly altered by an artificial cataclysm. While Vesuvius brought heat and ash from the Earth's depths, the atomic bomb unleashed its destructive power from the sky, a man-made sun. The remains of bodies in Pompeii, captured in their agony as the volcanic ash solidified around them, find a chilling parallel in the ash shadows of Hiroshima. These were not shadows cast by the sun, but by the instantaneous thermal radiation from the atomic blast. Objects or people that stood between the explosion and a surface, like a stone wall or steps, absorbed the intense heat, shielding the area directly behind them. The surrounding unshielded surface was scorched white or discoloured, leaving the unburned area in the shape of the obstructing figure. One of the most famous examples is the human shadow etched in stone at the entrance of the Sumitomo Bank, approximately 260 metres from the hypercentre. It is believed to be the outline of a person sitting on the steps, waiting for the bank to open, who was instantly incinerated, leaving only a ghostly imprint on the stone. This phenomenon is a direct consequence of the flash burn effect, where temperatures exceeding 1,800 degrees Celsius for less than 4 seconds instantly affected the surface. The heat itself was beyond comprehension. Those closest to the hypercentre, the point directly beneath the explosion, were quite literally vaporised. Their bodies did not leave remains in the conventional sense. Birds in midair spontaneously combusted. Dry combustible materials such as paper ignited spontaneously as far as 6,400 feet from ground zero. The skin of survivors, especially on exposed areas, suffered flash burns. Dark patterns of clothing were burned onto skin where lighter fabric might have reflected more of the thermal energy, demonstrating the unimaginable intensity of the light and heat. The entire city, within a matter of moments, became a searing inferno. The silence that followed the initial explosion was often described by survivors as profound, a vacuum before the chaos of screams and collapsing structures began to fill the air. For a fleeting moment, the auditory landscape was erased, superseded by the sheer force of the blast. Then came the sounds of a city in its death throes, the groan of twisted metal, the splintering of wood, the rush of winds generated by the ensuing firestorm. This firestorm, a massive conflagration fueled by the collapsed and ignited structures, engulfed an estimated 4.4 square miles of the city. The intense heat created a powerful updraft, sucking air inward, forming hurricane-force winds that further spread the flames and trapped those who might have otherwise escaped. Witness accounts from those who survived were often fragmented, reflecting the bewildering and overwhelming nature of the experience. Fujio Torikoshi, a 14-year-old student, was in a field 2 kilometers from the hypercenter. He recounted seeing a blackish mass of something floating in the sky in the distance right in front of me. In the next instant, it suddenly burst and transformed into an incredible ball of light. He felt an incredibly hot blast on his face, closed his eyes and squatted down. When he tried to stand, a strong blast of wind felt like it was lifting him into the air. He remembered a stinging, burning pain on his arms and face, discovering his skin was burned bright red. He found his mother calling him through the dust, and she carried him to a bomb shelter. He endured having blisters cut off with scissors, with a mixture of flour and vinegar applied to his wounds, and a high fever. He later learned that all his classmates who went to building demolition work that day had died. Kyoshi Tanimoto, a Methodist minister, was about 3,500 yards from the center of the explosion. He saw a blinding yellow light and found himself buried in darkness as his 2-story wooden house was blown to pieces. He described seeing a few people coming out of debris, and when he went up to a hillside to get a panorama view of the city, he found the whole city on fire. He encountered a long line of escapees, and yet without any expression. In deep silence they were escaping. I thought it was a procession of ghosts. This observation of silent, dazed figures wandering amidst the destruction speaks to the psychological trauma inflicted alongside the physical devastation. The aftermath of the bombing was a grim laboratory for scientists and medical professionals. On August 6, 1945, communications with Hiroshima suddenly ceased at 8:16 a.m., leading to vague reports of a massive explosion. The Japanese High Command initially had no clear understanding of what had occurred, as no large-scale air raid had been reported. However, within days a new perplexing phenomenon emerged among the survivors: radiation sickness. This was a completely new form of injury, distinct from burns and blast trauma. Medical staff began to recognize the first symptoms such as purpura, skin blood spots, mucosal bleeding from the mouth, gums and intestines, leading to bloody saliva and bloody diarrhea. High fevers, often reaching 39 to 42 degrees Celsius, were also frequently observed. Initially, doctors suspected bacterial infections like typhoid or sepsis, especially given the poor sanitary conditions. However, it was later understood that these fevers, along with the rapid decline in white blood cell count, were a consequence of radiation-induced bone marrow damage, leading to a compromised immune system and severe bacterial infections. By mid-September, roughly a month after the bombing, the death rate, which had initially been staggering due to immediate blast and heat effects, began to climb again as radiation sickness took its toll. Deaths from radiation sickness peaked 3 to 4 weeks after the attacks and continued to taper off over several more weeks. Scientists and medical researchers, often with limited understanding of the novel effects of radiation, meticulously documented the symptoms. They observed that those exposed to radiation in utero had a higher incidence of small head size, mental disability, and impaired physical growth, though a lower increase in cancer rates compared to children exposed at the time of the attack. In the years following the bombing, specific long-term health consequences became alarmingly apparent. Approximately 5 to 6 years after the bombings, a noticeable increase in the incidence of leukemia was observed among survivors. This spike peaked around 4 to 6 years post-bombing, with children being particularly affected. the Radiation Effects Research Foundation (RERF), a cooperative Japan-US organization established to study the health effects of atomic bomb survivors, later estimated the attributable risk of leukemia to be 46% for bomb victims. After about a decade, survivors began to suffer from thyroid, breast, lung, and other cancers at rates higher than normal. Tumor registries were established in both Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1956 to collect data on these excess cancer risks. It was discovered that the attributable rate of radiation exposure to solid cancer was significantly lower than for leukemia, at 10.7%. Even 70 years later, cancers related to radiation exposure continue to increase throughout the lifespans of the survivors. Interestingly, despite initial fears and rumours that Hiroshima and Nagasaki would remain dangerously radioactive for decades, scientists discovered that the levels of residual radioactivity quickly diminished. Following a nuclear explosion, there are two primary forms of residual radioactivity: fallout of nuclear material and fission products, and neutron activation. Most of the fallout was dispersed in the atmosphere or blown away by wind, though some did fall as black rain. However, the level of radioactivity today is so low that it is barely distinguishable from background radiation naturally present or from atmospheric tests conducted in the 1950s and 1960s. Neutron activation, where neutrons convert non-radioactive materials into radioactive ones, was also limited because the bombs were detonated at a significant altitude, minimizing direct contamination. Scientists concluded that nearly all induced radioactivity decayed within a few days of the explosions, allowing for eventual resettlement and reconstruction. This was a crucial scientific observation that countered initial popular misconceptions about the long-term habitability of the bombed cities. The scale of destruction offered scientists an unparalleled, albeit horrifying, opportunity to study the effects of a nuclear detonation. Within 1 mile of ground zero, nearly every structure was destroyed. Almost every building within 3 miles was damaged. The blast wave shattered glass in suburbs 12 miles away. Post-war studies of the victims found that less than 4.5% of survivors suffered leg fractures, a stark indicator of the immediate and catastrophic nature of the blast and thermal effects, which often resulted in instant death or incineration, leaving little to fracture. The complete cessation of radio and telegraph communications with Hiroshima at 8:16 a.m., along with the absence of significant conventional air raids before the explosion, pointed to a single, immensely powerful event, a fact that perplexed Japanese authorities until the true nature of the weapon became clear. Scientists, observing the city's transformation, noted the uniform nature of the destruction, as if 2 scientific experiments had been conducted, comparing the death rate curves of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which proved to be remarkably similar. This provided critical data on the radius and intensity of effects from such a device. The Bronze Age collapse, a world falls. The Bronze Age, a period of interconnected civilizations stretching from the Aegean to the Indus, flourished for nearly 2 millennia. It was a time defined by sophisticated trade networks, grand palaces, monumental architecture, and the widespread use of bronze, a sturdy alloy of copper and tin that revolutionized toolmaking and warfare. Empires like the Hittites in Anatolia, the New Kingdom in Egypt, and the Mycenaean kingdoms in Greece maintained complex diplomatic ties, exchanging goods, ideas, and even royal brides. Cities like Ugarit on the Syrian coast served as vital hubs for international commerce, where goods from distant lands were bought, sold, and transshipped. Life for many, though often harsh, was supported by agricultural surplus, while elites enjoyed luxuries brought from across the known world. This era of relative stability and prosperity, however, began to fray around the 13th century BCE, leading to a catastrophic and widespread collapse that fundamentally reshaped the ancient world. The term Bronze Age collapse refers not to a single event, but a series of interconnected and compounding disasters that swept across the Eastern Mediterranean and Near East between roughly 1200 and 1150 BCE. It was a systemic failure, meaning that multiple critical aspects of society broke down simultaneously, creating a cascade effect that proved irreversible for many established powers. One of the most striking features of this collapse is the widespread evidence of destruction by fire. Archaeological excavations across numerous sites reveal layers of ash, burnt timbers, and melted pottery, indicating sudden and violent ends to once thriving urban centres. At Mycenae, the iconic citadel in Greece, archaeological findings point to a series of destructions. The so-called granary was destroyed by fire around 1250 BCE, followed by a more comprehensive destruction of the entire citadel and surrounding settlement around 1200 BCE, leaving widespread evidence of burning. The walls, once formidable, could not protect against the overwhelming forces at play. Similarly, the palace at Tiryns, another major Mycenaean centre, shows signs of extensive destruction by fire around the same time, its impressive fortifications also failing to withstand the onslaught. The destruction was not isolated to the Aegean. Further east, the great port city of Ugarit, located on the coast of modern-day Syria, provides a particularly vivid and poignant example of the collapse. Excavations at Ras Shamra, the site of ancient Ugarit, unearthed tablets from the royal palace archives, many of which were found baked hard in the fires that consumed the city. These tablets, written in Ugaritic cuneiform, describe a desperate situation. Letters from the last days of Ugarit speak of naval attacks, enemy movements, and requests for aid from allies who themselves were facing similar threats. One letter, attributed to the Hittite king Suppiluliuma II, speaks of ships from Ahiyawa, likely Mycenaean Greece, causing trouble. More chillingly, a letter from the king of Ugarit to the king of Alexandria, Cyprus, states, "My father, behold, the enemy's ships came here. My cities were burned, and they did evil things in my country. Does not my father know that all my troops and chariots are in the land of Hatti, and all my ships are in the land of Lucca? Thus, the country is abandoned to itself. May my father know it. The 7 ships of the enemy that came here inflicted much damage upon us." This plea for help was likely never answered, or if it was too late. The destruction of Ugarit is dated by archaeologists to around 1190 BCE, marked by a massive destruction layer with evidence of intense burning. This sudden and violent end to such a pivotal trading hub had far-reaching consequences for the entire region. The collapse extended to the heartlands of major empires. The Hittite Empire, a formidable power that had rivaled Egypt for centuries, disintegrated. Archaeological evidence suggests that their capital, Hattusa, in central Anatolia, was abandoned and largely destroyed around 1200 BCE. While there is no direct evidence of a single decisive battle or destruction by fire on the scale of Mycenae or Ugarit, the city shows signs of decline, dwindling population, and eventual abandonment. Public works ceased, and the grand structures of the imperial city fell into disrepair. The intricate cuneiform archives of the Hittites, which recorded their long history, laws, and diplomatic correspondence, ceased to be produced. The great kings and their vast bureaucracy simply vanished from the historical record. The loss of the Hittite Empire disrupted the geopolitical balance, creating a power vacuum that further destabilized the region. Egypt, though battered, survived the collapse, but not without significant trauma. The New Kingdom, a period of immense wealth and power, entered a long decline. Pharaoh Ramesses III, reigning from approximately 1186 to 1155 BCE, famously recorded his struggles against foreign invaders, whom he collectively referred to as the Sea Peoples, on the walls of his mortuary temple at Medinet Habu. These inscriptions depict fierce naval and land battles against a diverse coalition of peoples, including the Peliset, likely the Philistines, the Tjeka, the Shekelesh, the Danaan, and the Veshesh. Ramesses III claims victory, stating, "The foreign countries made a conspiracy in their islands. All at once the lands were disrupted and scattered in the fray. No land could stand before their arms, from Hatti, Kode, Karkemish, Adzawa, and Alashia on, being cut off at one time." A camp was set up in Amuru. They desolated its people, and its land was like that which had never come into being. They were coming, while the flame was prepared before them, forward to Egypt. Their confederation was the Peliset, Tjeka, Shekelesh, Danaan, and Veshesh, lands united. They laid their hands upon the land as far as the circuit of the earth, their hearts confident and trusting, "Our plans will succeed." While Ramesses III depicts a definitive victory, the very necessity of such extensive military campaigns, and the subsequent settlement of some of these sea peoples in Egyptian-controlled territories, indicates a severe disruption to Egypt's control and stability. The ongoing raids and internal strife ultimately weakened the central government, leading to the fragmentation of power and the decline of the new kingdom's international influence. Beyond direct military conflict, other systemic factors contributed to the widespread collapse. Climate change, specifically prolonged periods of drought, is increasingly recognized as a significant contributing factor. Paleoclimate data, derived from sources like tree rings, lake sediments, and speleothems, cave formations, indicate several severe drought episodes in the eastern Mediterranean during the Late Bronze Age. For instance, a study published in Science Advances in 2018 analysed oxygen isotopes from speleothems in Sorek Cave, Israel, showing a marked increase in aridity around 1200 BCE, suggesting a significant drop in rainfall that would have severely impacted agricultural yields. This would have led to widespread famine, exacerbating existing social tensions and weakening central authority. When food supplies dwindle, populations become desperate, leading to internal migration, increased banditry, and a breakdown of social order. The archaeological record at sites like Tel Twaini, a Bronze Age city in Syria, provides evidence of changes in agricultural practices and a shift towards more drought-resistant crops, indicating a prolonged period of environmental stress. Earthquakes also played a role in the destruction of some sites. The eastern Mediterranean is a seismically active region, and major earthquakes have occurred throughout history. While not the sole cause of the collapse, seismic activity could have weakened infrastructure, making cities more vulnerable to attack or abandonment. For example, evidence of earthquake damage has been observed at Mycenae and Tiryns, preceding or coinciding with their ultimate destruction. The sequence of events at some sites suggests a complex interplay of natural disasters and human conflict. A massive earthquake might have damaged city walls, making them easier targets for attackers already emboldened by famine and political instability. The intricate economic systems of the Bronze Age were also severely disrupted. The highly specialised production of bronze relied on long-distance trade routes to acquire the necessary raw materials: copper from Cyprus and tin from distant sources like Afghanistan or even Cornwall in Britain. The collapse of major powers like the Hittites and the widespread destruction of trading hubs like Ugarit severed these vital supply lines. With the disruption of trade, the availability of bronze would have plummeted, leading to an economic crisis. Iron, a more readily available but initially harder to work metal, eventually replaced bronze, but the transition was slow and arduous. The breakdown of this metal trade is evidenced by the decline in bronze artifacts found in later archaeological strata and the eventual rise of iron metallurgy in the subsequent Iron Age. The disappearance of writing systems in many regions is another stark indicator of the systemic collapse. While Egypt continued its hieroglyphic tradition and Mesopotamia maintained cuneiform, in the Aegean, the Mycenaean Linear B script, used primarily for administrative and economic records, vanished completely. Thousands of Linear B tablets, documenting the daily workings of the Mycenaean palaces, abruptly cease around 1200 BCE. The very purpose of this script, to manage complex bureaucratic systems, became redundant as those systems themselves crumbled. The literacy associated with Linear B was confined to a small elite of scribes and administrators, and with the destruction of the palaces and the breakdown of centralized authority, the knowledge and infrastructure required to maintain this complex writing system disappeared. This linguistic void meant that for several centuries, until the emergence of the Greek alphabet, there was little to no written record from the Greek mainland, marking a dark age in terms of historical documentation. Similarly, the Luwian hieroglyphic script used in parts of Anatolia also experienced a significant decline, though it did persist in a more limited form in some Neo-Hittite states. The overall picture is one of interconnected breakdowns. No single cause can fully explain the widespread devastation. Instead, it was a convergence of factors: climate change leading to drought and famine, internal rebellions and social unrest, external invasions by groups like the Sea Peoples, earthquakes, and the collapse of the intricately linked economic and political systems that underpinned the Bronze Age world. The loss of central authority meant that localized conflicts escalated, trade routes became unsafe, and specialized crafts, dependent on royal patronage and stable supply chains, withered. People abandoned large urban centers, seeking refuge in smaller, more defensible settlements or returning to subsistence agriculture. The grand interconnected world of the Late Bronze Age fractured into smaller, isolated communities, and it would take centuries for new, albeit different civilizations to emerge from the ashes. The sheer scale and simultaneous nature of the destructions and abandonments across such a vast geographical area underscores the truly systemic nature of this unprecedented collapse. The Late Bronze Age, a period marked by interconnectedness and widespread prosperity across the Aegean, Anatolia, the Near East and Egypt, reached an abrupt and devastating end. This phenomenon, known as the Bronze Age collapse, was not a singular event but rather a systemic, multi-region disaster that unfolded roughly between 1250 and 1150 BCE. It manifested through a series of rapid destructions, the abandonment of major urban centres, the disappearance of established writing systems, and a drastic decline in trade and diplomatic relations. What emerged in its wake was a period often referred to as a Dark Age in many regions, characterised by fragmentation, decentralisation, and a notable loss of cultural complexity. One of the most striking pieces of evidence for this collapse is the widespread archaeological record of fires. Cities that had thrived for centuries were suddenly engulfed in flames. For instance, the monumental Mycenaean palaces on mainland Greece, including those at Mycenae, Tiryns and Pylos, suffered widespread destruction by fire around the end of the LH3B pottery phase, which is generally placed at or near the end of the 13th century BCE or early in the 12th century. At Pylos, excavators discovered a rich archive of Linear B tablets, a script used for administrative purposes which were baked hard by the very fire that destroyed the palace. This unintentional preservation provides a snapshot of the palace administration in its final moments, detailing records of provisions, personnel, and even defensive preparations, suggesting a crisis was underway. The abrupt cessation of these administrative records after the fire at Pylos, and indeed across all Mycenaean centres, demonstrates the immediate and profound impact of these destructions. Beyond Greece, the destruction by fire was also evident in Anatolia and the Levant. Hattusa, the capital of the mighty Hittite Empire, located in modern-day Turkey, was burned and abandoned. Archaeological layers at Hattusa show clear evidence of conflagration, marking the definitive end of this powerful empire. Similarly, the city of Ugarit, a crucial trading hub on the Syrian coast, met a fiery end. Excavations at Ras Shamra, the site of ancient Ugarit, have revealed destruction levels containing late Helladic 3TB pottery, but notably no LH3EC, indicating a destruction date that aligns with the broader collapse. A cuneiform tablet discovered in 1986 at Ugarit suggests the city was destroyed sometime after the death of Pharaoh Meneptah, 1203 BCE, and is generally agreed to have been destroyed by the 8th year of Ramesses III, 1178 BCE. More recent radiocarbon dating, coupled with historical dates and astronomical events like the solar eclipse of January 21st, 1192 BCE, points to a destruction date for Ugarit between 1192 and 1190 BCE. The royal palace at Ugarit, a massive complex of finely dressed stones with numerous courtyards and halls, was utterly destroyed, never to be resettled. The archives of cuneiform tablets found within the palace, covering aspects of Ugaritic life from the 14th to 12th centuries BCE, abruptly cease, providing a stark testament to the finality of the destruction. The abandonment of cities was another hallmark of this period. While some sites like Ugarit and Hattusa suffered fiery destruction, others simply ceased to be inhabited, or saw their populations drastically reduced. The intricately organised palace systems, which had been the backbone of the Bronze Age economy and society, disintegrated. The loss of these centralised authorities meant a breakdown in the complex logistical networks that sustained large urban populations and long-distance trade. The disappearance of writing systems is a particularly compelling aspect of the collapse. In the Aegean, the Linear B script, used by the Mycenaeans for bureaucratic record-keeping, vanished entirely after the destruction of the palaces. This sophisticated writing system, which was a form of early Greek, would not be relearned or reinvented for another 4 centuries, leading to what is often termed the Greek Dark Ages. The literate administrative class that maintained these records seemingly disappeared or lost its function, and the knowledge of writing was not sustained outside the palatial context. In Anatolia, the cuneiform script used by the Hittites also ceased to be employed. This loss of literacy signifies a profound societal regression as the ability to record history, laws, and economic transactions was lost. Multiple factors are proposed to have contributed to this systemic collapse, often interacting in a destructive cascade. Climate change, specifically a severe and prolonged drought, is increasingly seen as a significant contributing factor. Studies of tree rings, such as those from juniper timbers excavated at the Midas Mound tumulus at Gordion in Turkey, provide a detailed reconstruction of the climate around the time of the Hittite collapse. Researchers found unusually low growth in the juniper wood, particularly between 1198 BCE and 1196 BCE, indicating 3 consecutive years of severe drought. This climatic stress would have led to widespread crop failures and famine, severely impacting food supplies and the economic stability of empires. The Hittites, being a landlocked empire, would have been particularly vulnerable to such agricultural crises, as they lacked easy access to external food sources via sea trade. This would have undermined their tax base, potentially led to the desertion of their military, and sparked mass movements of people seeking survival. Brandon L. Drake's work on the Sorek Cave in Israel, which contains a 150,000-year record of precipitation, shows a steady decline in rainfall leading up to and during the Bronze Age collapse, suggesting a mega-drought in the region between approximately 1200 and 850 BCE. This evidence from pollen and alluvial records, alongside desperate letters between monarchs, underscores the reality of widespread drought and its impact on agricultural production. Earthquakes also played a role in the destruction of many sites. The Aegean and Eastern Mediterranean are seismically active regions. Archaeological evidence consistent with earthquake damage, such as collapsed and reinforced walls, toppled columns, and dislodged architectural elements, has been observed at several sites. While an earthquake alone might not cause a societal collapse, a series of severe quakes, or an earthquake storm, as some scholars suggest for the period of 1275 BCE, could have severely weakened infrastructure, disrupted supply lines, and demoralized populations already under stress from other factors. The city of Mycenae itself is built on active normal faults, and geological evidence suggests recent koseismic slip. The combination of such natural disasters with existing societal vulnerabilities could have pushed already fragile systems past their breaking point. The disruption of trade networks was another critical element. The Bronze Age was defined by its reliance on bronze, an alloy of copper and tin. Tin sources were geographically limited, leading to extensive long-distance trade routes across the Mediterranean and Near East to secure this vital metal. With the collapse of centralized authorities and the disruption of these trade routes, the supply of tin and consequently bronze would have been severely curtailed. Archaeological finds of copper ingots shaped like ox hides, indicating their use in long-distance maritime trade, disappear or become scarce in many regions. This breakdown of the metal trade would have had far-reaching consequences, affecting not only weaponry and tools, but also the very economic structure that supported these complex societies. The increasing use of iron, a more readily available but initially inferior metal in the subsequent Iron Age, reflects this shift away from the bronze-based economy. The enigmatic Sea Peoples are frequently cited in ancient texts as a major factor in the collapse, particularly in Egyptian records. Pharaoh Meneptah, in his 5th regnal year, circa 1208 BCE, records a significant invasion by a coalition of Libyan tribes and Sea Peoples, including the Ekwesh, Teresh, Luka, Shurden, and Shekelesh, who attacked Egypt from the west. His hymn of victory on the Athribis stela and the Great Karnak inscription details his defeat of these invaders. Later, in the 8th year of Ramesses III, circa 1177 BCE, another, even larger wave of Sea Peoples, including the Peliset, Tieka, Shekelesh, Denyen, and Vashesh, is depicted on the walls of his mortuary temple at Medinet Habu. These inscriptions portray land and sea battles, showing the Egyptians repelling these invaders, who are depicted with distinctive horned helmets and round shields. While Egyptian records assert victories, the constant pressure and the economic strain of these conflicts undoubtedly weaken the new kingdom. The precise identity and origins of the Sea Peoples remain debated, with theories ranging from dislocated populations fleeing environmental disasters to organised marauders. Regardless of their exact identity, their documented attacks contributed significantly to the instability and destruction across the eastern Mediterranean. Evidence from sites in Cyprus, such as Pila Kokinokremos, and in Canaan, like Tel Nami, suggests that some groups identified as sea peoples had settled in these regions, indicating a migratory aspect to their movements, possibly driven by the same environmental and systemic pressures affecting the established powers. The fall of Nineveh, the year 612 BC, marks a pivotal moment in the history of the ancient Near East, witnessing the dramatic fall of Nineveh, the formidable capital of the Neo-Assyrian Empire. This event was not a sudden collapse, but the culmination of years of conflict, strategic alliances, and a final brutal siege that effectively erased Assyrian dominance from the world stage. Nineveh, situated on the eastern bank of the Tigris River, near what is modern-day Mosul in Iraq, was a city of immense proportions and grandeur. It was renowned for its extensive fortifications, monumental architecture, and its role as a hub of trade and administration. For several decades, it held the distinction of being the largest city in the world. Its walls, in certain sections, were over 100 feet tall and 100 feet wide, encircling an area of approximately 3 square miles. These defences included at least 18 gates, some of which were flanked by colossal human-headed winged bull and lion sculptures, known as lamassu. The city was a testament to Assyrian power, a testament to their engineering prowess and their ability to command vast resources. Within its boundaries stood the magnificent Palace Without Rival of Sennacherib and the Northern Palace of Ashurbanipal, adorned with intricately carved reliefs depicting royal hunts, military campaigns, and court life. Ashurbanipal's library, a collection of over 30,000 inscribed clay tablets, was also housed within Nineveh, a repository of ancient knowledge that would later become a crucial source for understanding Mesopotamian civilization. The decline of the Neo-Assyrian Empire, which had for centuries exerted its will across a vast territory stretching from the Caucasus Mountains to Egypt and from central Iran to Cyprus, was driven by a combination of internal strife and the rise of powerful external adversaries. A protracted 12-year struggle between Babylon and Assyria, coupled with civil wars within Assyria itself, had significantly weakened the empire. The Babylonian king Nabopolassar, who had seized control of much of Babylonia from Assyrian rule, spearheaded the alliance determined to overthrow the Assyrian Empire and shift the centre of Mesopotamian power to Babylon. The decisive assault on Nineveh began in 612 BC. An allied army, comprising forces from the Babylonians under Nabopolassar and the Medes under King Cyaxares, converged on the Assyrian capital. This was not their first joint action. In 614 BC, the Median army had already attacked and sacked Assur, the Assyrians' original home city, a significant blow to Assyrian prestige and military strength. The besieging forces encamped against Nineveh, initiating a siege that would last for 3 months. The defences of Nineveh were formidable, designed to withstand sustained attacks. Conventional battering rams proved ineffective against the city's massive walls. The strategy shifted to one of attrition, aiming to starve the city into submission. Ancient accounts, such as those from the Greek historian Ctesias, preserved in Diodorus Siculus, mention a traditional oracle stating that Nineveh would not fall until the river became its enemy. While Ctesias's accounts are sometimes viewed with skepticism, this specific detail regarding the Tigris River has garnered attention from modern scholars and aligns with archaeological findings. During the siege, heavy rains reportedly caused the Tigris River to swell and overflow its banks. This inundation is believed to have played a critical role in the city's downfall, potentially undermining or even collapsing a section of the city wall for a considerable distance. This breach, whether caused by the direct force of the floodwaters or by weakening the foundations of the defences, would have created a vulnerable point for the besieging armies. In August of 612 BC, after the prolonged siege, the Allied forces finally broke through Nineveh's defences. The specific mechanism of entry is not fully detailed in all surviving accounts, but the weakening or breach of the walls by the floodwaters, or a direct assault on the gates after a concentrated effort, allowed the Babylonian and Median armies to pour into the city. The Assyrian king Sin-Sharishkun was reportedly killed during the siege. Upon breaching the defences, the city was subjected to a brutal sacking. The Allied forces began plundering and burning Nineveh. Temples were looted, and the royal palace was set ablaze. archaeological excavations have revealed extensive evidence of widespread destruction by fire. Layers of ash and burnt debris are consistently found in the occupational strata, corresponding to 612 BC. What is particularly interesting for scientists is that while the fire destroyed much of the organic material and weakened stone structures, the intense heat had unexpected preserving effect on some of the clay tablets within Ashurbanipal's library. The fire baked these unbaked clay tablets, hardening them and thus preserving them from deterioration that would otherwise have occurred over millennia. This accidental consequence of the city's destruction has provided modern archaeologists with an invaluable trove of cuneiform texts, offering insights into Assyrian history, literature, and daily life. The destruction was comprehensive, the city was laid waste, and its population was subjected to slaughter or enslavement. The scale of the devastation was such that later historical memory often depicted Nineveh as a bloody city full of lies and robbery, reflecting the vengeful sentiment of those who had suffered under Assyrian rule. While some portions of the city's structures, such as parts of Sennacherib's palace, were surprisingly well preserved in their collapse due to the intense conflagration, the overall effect was one of utter ruin. The city never recovered its former political or administrative prominence. Although remnants of the city continued to be occupied in later periods, Nineveh effectively vanished from the map as a major power centre. Its ruins slowly became buried under layers of earth, becoming Tel Mounds, Tel Kuyunjik and Tel Nebi Yunus that preserved the ghost of the once mighty capital. The rediscovery of Nineveh began in the mid-19th century. Paul-Émile Bottard, the French consul at Mosul, initiated excavations in 1842 at Khorsabad, initially believing he had found Nineveh. His findings, though from a different Assyrian capital, sparked immense interest. It was Austin Henry Layard, a young British explorer who, from 1845 onwards, conducted extensive excavations first at Nimrud, ancient Kalhu, and then, crucially, in 1847, moved to the mound of Kuyunjik, across the Tigris from Mosul. There, he unearthed the fabled city of Nineveh itself. Layard's discoveries, including monumental winged bulls and lions and vast numbers of cuneiform tablets, captivated the European public, with his book Nineveh and Its Remains, published in 1849, becoming a bestseller. Later, in 1853, Hormuzd-Rassam, Layard's assistant, discovered the North Palace of Ashurbanipal at Nineveh with its brilliantly carved sculptures. These expeditions, motivated in part by nationalistic rivalries between Britain and France, brought the forgotten Assyrian civilization back into the light of history.